Ooh, welcome to Best in Faction.
The next generation.
A podcast where we throw games with 3 arms.
I'm Tyler.
I'm Nick.
And I'm Lucas.
And today is the day of Ascension, ladies and gentlemen. We are bringing you a hot and spicy GSC-oriented episode. It is the first part in our 3-part series of deep diving the main factions of the TNG players, trying to get y'all some of that high-level content that we often don't have time to dive too deep on because we're trying to cover a whole lot of stuff at once. So today is just GSC and also maybe a little bit about how to beat GSC. So we're going to jump into depth on lists. We're going to talk about changes in omens. We're going to talk about why this faction is doing so damn well at the top right now. It's going to be awesome. But before we jump into any of that, we have not been on air for a long time. Got to check in with the boys. How are we doing today? How you doing, Lucas?
I'm doing great. This has been, it was kind of a hectic last couple months. Since January, I traveled back home for the holidays. I traveled to New Jersey for a practice weekend with Anthony and TJ and Nick, which was great. And then I also obviously traveled to LVO. And then last week, we also went out to the coast for Beach Hammer. So it was a whole bunch of travel, which was very stressful in the middle of like the busy work season. But we're finally through all of it, and now we can relax. So I'm feeling a lot better. Also very excited about Orcs right now. Chaos Knights were definitely very fun, but coming back home to the Great Green has been an absolute blast. And at LVO, leading up to LVO, and even after LVO, I've been having a lot of success with Orcs, and I'm excited to keep building lists and trying stuff out. So overall, I'm feeling great. I'm also excited about hobbying again. I hate painting vehicles, so hobbying Chaos Knights was such a chore, and they looked terrible as a result. But I think my Orcs look pretty cool. And I'm excited about painting them again. So some more guys are going to get some paint sometime soon, which is going to be just wonderful. I'm very excited about everything 40K related right now. Yeah, that's me. Things are going great. Yeah, I guess a little bit about Beach Hammer. I know a lot of folks have heard us reference it in the past. Beach Hammer is our colloquial term for a little Pacific Northwest or Portland in particular Warhammer get together at our friend Kim's cottage or cabin, I guess we should say, out on the coast. And yeah, so we all just kind of meet up there, set up 3 or 4 tables, play a whole bunch of Warhammer, have some brewskis, hang out with the boys. It's just a great time, honestly. And so yeah, we were all out there. There was maybe I think 9 or 10 of us this last time. And we were all hanging out and playing a bunch of games. It was a blast. So that was last weekend, and it was a great kind of test bed for a lot of orc lists that I've been working on recently. So won't get to hear too much about that in this episode, but in future episodes, we'll hear plenty about orcs. How are you doing, Nick?
Week, baby. Orcs Supreme.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I think Orcs is next week. I'm doing all right. I unfortunately was not able to attend Beach Hammer, which was a bummer, but I'm glad that you guys had a good time and were able to regale me with the tales of practice games. Yeah, I guess like without getting too much into it, I've been out for the past few weeks because I just had to have like a basically quick emergency surgery. I had an appendix flare up. If anyone has any questions about that, I am now a certified expert on the appendix and everything related to that. So there you go. Nothing like super crazy, but just like, I had to take it easy for 2 weeks after. And well, I mean, I was getting it taken out, I think the morning of our show 2 weeks ago. So yeah, I was like, I'm not going to be able to make it, guys. So yeah, I haven't really been able to practice too much since then. I thought that, maybe hanging around I'd be able to, but kind of they recommend don't really lift, twist, bend, which surprisingly there's a little bit of that in Warhammer. But yeah, hoping to be able to practice these next 2 weeks here before our big GT coming up in March 11th, Rosehammer GT. If you haven't signed up yet, unfortunately, I think it is full at like 100 something people.
110
but
sold out.
Yeah, might be able to contact to be put on the wait list. Or if you're in the area, come check it out. It should be quite the spectacle. So I'm looking forward to that. I've got a Votan list pretty locked in. I just need to finish painting some of the models, and I guess see what it's like on the table against some armies. So yeah, looking forward to that. How are you doing, Tyler?
Very cool. I am doing great. I am so glad that you are on the up and up again. That was a scary couple of weeks there. Glad that modern medicine is a miracle. But yeah, practice weekend out on the beach was fantastic. I've also gotten a bunch of games outside of that. GSC are just going in crazy places now, and as I'll talk about later this episode, I finally have some command over this list. For a while, I was just basically doing what Innis had told me to do, and now I am changing things and innovating and bringing a couple of my own unique flavors to things. So figuring that out has been a ton of fun. Been working through a lot of complicated and difficult matchups, which are interesting. And then, Rosehammer is going to be a ton of fun. I've been working closely with Colton, who's been on the show before, our incredible local TO, who is bringing all new player place terrain. We've built 5 different table setups that are custom for this event that'll be used in future events that he's running. They're all super cool. Very excited about that. Been working hard on that kind of stuff. And yeah, very, very nice to have things, like Lucas said, chill down a little bit. Also had a lot of really busy stuff around work and grad school the last couple of weeks. So getting a chance to take a break and focus more on the hobby is real nice. Sweet. All right. So this is a very different episode from the sort of stuff that we usually do. Like the stuff that we usually do, I'm not going to stop talking until they make me. But unlike usual, I'm actually somewhat licensed to do that this time because this is a bit of my specialty. So bear with me as we try to figure out this format, and it should get a little more refined for Lucas. Lucas will be next week with Orcs, and then the following week will be Rosehammer, so there won't be a show. The following week will be the Rosehammer recap, and the week after that, I believe, we'll be doing Nick's Votan episode. Hopefully he'll have a lot of interesting things to say about it by then. But here's sort of my vague outline for how I want the show to work. We're going to talk about what GSC were like before Omens. We're going to talk about what changed in Omens and why that makes us maybe better. We're going to talk about how to play GSC. For a lot of people out there are trying to get into this hobby right now. A lot of bug players are looking for something to do. And then lastly, we're going to talk about how to play against GSC, which is something that I've been getting a lot of questions about because it really feels like a totally different way to play the game if you have to play into this stuff. Fortunately, I've got 2 guys over here who have played against a lot of GSC recently who will help us provide some options on that, and I'll give you my 2 cents as well. For the record, I have never played the GSC mirror, though I'm sure it's going to happen one of these days, and I'm looking forward to it. So GSC have been around for a hot minute now. Our story kind of starts in WTC of last summer, where Eric Lathuris, who, by the way, has just started a Patreon for some of his own content that's going to be happening. Definitely check that out. It's called... it's got a fun name, and I can't remember what it is, and I feel bad about it. Anyway, I'll link it in the description if I can remember, but I've already signed up. It's really cool. So he is sort of the progenitor of Gene Stealer Colts, and he takes them to WTC last year, and he brings out this list with 40 neophytes, 3 rock grinders, and 30 bikes, and a bunch of characters, and says, what are y'all going to do about it? And just skull drags people. Team Australia, his team ends up winning the LVO that year, or the WTC that year. Oh my gosh. Such an American. They win WTC, and that's really cool, and people start to try to mess with this and try to iterate on it. Eventually, Innes Wilson also starts taking this list, and we bump it up. We drop the trucks and jump it up to 80 neophytes and 30 bikes and characters, and that's sort of where I step in, and we finish out the season with that as sort of the build to be playing. A couple people are doing some other things as well. There's some people playing Twisted Helix. There's some people playing Pauper Princes. But this sort of bike and neophyte spam with custom cult has really taken root. I'll talk about the specific lists in a sec. And the list is doing very well. It does a lot of stuff really excellently. It has a lot of shenanigans that I'll get into later on. And it just hits insanely hard, and people aren't sure what to do about it. So it's looking really good. It's performing really well. And then Omens hits. And here we'll talk about some of the changes that we got. There's really, in my mind, two things that happened here. There's three things. There's the points changes, there's the secondary changes, and then there's the army construction changes. And we're going to go over those in that order. So points changes first. Since Omens, a couple things changed pretty dramatically. I think the biggest change is to the neophyte squads. The neophyte squads were already the bread and butter of the faction, and they got better. Neophytes, it's come in bricks of up to 20, and for every 10 dudes, you get 2 special weapons and 2 heavy weapons. Heavy weapons, untouched, as far as I can tell. The heavy stubbers might have become free, but don't worry about that. The seismic cannons, which is what you were taking, didn't change, but the special weapons went from like 5 points per model to 0 points per model, which means that every squad now is going to have 4 heavy and 4 special. Those specials being flamers, grenade launchers, and webbers. I'll talk about which of those 3 you should be thinking about later on, but they're all valid choices. So that's real big. And then the other thing that changed for them points-wise is the icons in the squads went from 20 points per upgrade to 10 points per upgrade, which is a dramatic shift. And I personally went from taking 1 of those to now I'm taking 4 of them. So they're a real big change. That's very exciting. Also, the sergeant weapons became free, but you're still not taking those. Stop it. The bikes also got changed in points. They're kind of wonky. They went up 3 points per model, 6 points for the quads, but also their melee weapons become free. So it's kind of like everyone just has to take the melee weapons now because they were 3 points, except the quads still go up 3. But then also the incinerators on the quads went down 10, or went down to maybe from 10 to 5. They went down. And then also for the squad, the grenade launchers went from 5 points to free. So at the end of the day, when it's all said and done, I think each squad is up like net 16 points, but they've gotten a lot better because those grenade launchers, as I'll talk about later, are going to allow you to apply crossfire at distance and also just generally increase the output. And having the melee weapons included just fundamentally improves the output of the squad and sort of changes what they're able to do, which is real exciting. And you may be saying, well, why weren't you taking the melee weapons before if paying 3 points more per model made them better? It didn't. I would not have paid 30 points for this in the past, but to pay basically half of that at the end of the day with all the net changes feels pretty good. And then all our characters got cheaper. We've been asking for this forever. Basically, every character across the board went down 5 to 10 points. You can look at the specifics of that later, but it just offsets a lot of the points hikes from the bikes. I think the list that I ended up taking to LVO came out maybe 5 or 10 points over after all the changes. So it works out to be basically net neutral on that. And then the third and final major change that GSC saw in Omens was in list construction. And there's 2 pieces to this. The first of which is that because you're now stuck in 1 detachment, and they specifically excluded Gene Sect from the stratagem to take an additional 1 per detachment character from working. So GSC can't use that. We are hard locked into 1 of each character in your army in total. Now, most people were only taking 1 detachment. We're only having 1 of each character in the first place, but there were people out there playing a second patrol to grab double Keller morph. There were people out there trying to get a second icon ward in there. All of it's done. We're not doing that anymore. It's not a thing. But the other side of this is that Guard got opened up as a much more feasible option. And the reason for this is that Guard no longer costs CP to take. It used to cost you 2 CP to take a patrol, and now it's free. And what's really interesting is that GSC are one of the only factions, if not the only faction, that has maximal flexibility in what their allied detachment looks like. So there's a potentiality for it to be a patrol, like every other Battle Brothers, but it can also be an auxiliary support detachment, or it can be a super heavy aux detachment. Now, I'm going to focus on those first 2 when I talk about lists, but there is a GSC plus Baneblade list out there, I'm sure. I haven't personally worked out what that would look like, but it sounds highly entertaining to me. So that change to the list construction is pretty darn exciting. Yeah, is there anything that I missed there, or Lucas, that you've seen in change as far as GSC list construction goes?
Did you talk at all about secondaries, or is that going to come later?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Thank you. That was one of the three big things. Our secondaries got changed. Now, we already had fantastic secondaries. Brood Swarm, top tier secondary, basically an auto 15 for showing up. I was playing a game the other day, and my opponent pointed out, they were like, you realize that with Brood Swarm, you just scored 2 points a turn for standing in your deployment zone. Like that is how silly that secondary is. If you can just sit your army behind walls in your DZ, you get 10 points just for showing up. It's very strong. And we already were a fantastic shadow operations secondary. R&D, very easy. Banners, also very realistic. And then sabotage critical location. Maybe there's play in that. I haven't figured it out just yet. I'm not sold yet that you would ever need it, but it's certainly an interesting option. And then the big change that we saw is that ambush got substantially buffed. Ambush used to be score a point for killing a unit with crossfire, score 2 points for killing a unit with exposure, traditional old-fashioned draw a line across exposure, and score 2 points for killing a unit with someone that arrived via deep strike or ambush that turn. Underground or ambush specifically, to a cap of 4. But now it's gone up to a cap of 5, and the crossfire has gone up to 2 points instead of 1. So at the end of the day, basically killing a unit is getting you 2 points a turn, and realistically, you're getting that exposure pretty often, and you're killing units with things that deep strike pretty often. So it's like a guaranteed 12, and it kind of goes up from there. I'll often find that I am worried about it. Like I'm not doing it well on turn 1, and then on turn 2, I don't get an exposure or something. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's turn 2 and I've only got 4 points. And then suddenly turn 3, 4, 5, I get 4, 4, 4, and it's a 15. It's a very strong secondary. So on an average game into an opponent that doesn't have particular tech to deal with your secondaries, you're talking about basically walking up to the table with a 42 is what it feels like, maybe a 40. Which is where you want to be in this game if you want to be competing at the very top. But what's horrifying is that unlike Necrons, which were sort of the previous big bad, we score infinitely many points, and you have to just stop us as quickly as you can, because let me tell you, GSC can score all those points in 3 turns, basically, if they're particularly inclined to do so, or at least the majority of them. Unlike Necrons, the GSC are coming to you and they are skull dragging you. This is a table your opponent army that happens to score incredibly well, as opposed to a scoring army that works really well that then gets to spend a bunch of points on hitting hard. I don't know if you maybe disagree with that assessment of Necrons, Nick, but it felt like you had to go and get Necrons and the GSC are coming to you.
So
that's
when I played Necrons, it definitely felt a lot more like you have all this threat just waiting behind a wall. And you're like, yeah, come to me and stop my scoring machine. You get the first punch, but then I hit you with my whole army. GSC, it's opposite. Absolutely. You never get to hit them first.
Let's talk a little bit about why it is that you don't get to hit them first. Lucas, as a player of armies that like to hit people first, why exactly does GSC pose such an issue to that archetype under certain situations? I realize that you are not necessarily getting your butt kicked every time we play, but it certainly forces you to play in a very different way than you would into most other armies. What about GSC provides such a blunting to those sort of armies?
Well, I mean, it's the one of the only all deep strike armies for a reason, right? There's only like a couple of all deep strike armies in the game, and GSC are probably the one that do like a drop turn the best. So usually when I see people playing the 80 neophytes list and 30 bikers, it's playing conservatively with the bikers for the first 3 turns, and then when the 80 neophytes come in, all of a sudden you're having to deal with all 30 bikers and all 80 neophytes in your face all at once. And that's like the terrifying drop turn. So like while they're racking up all these points, they're also killing your army and putting immense pressure on your ability to score points. And Yeah, so that in my opinion is why playing against GSC can feel so crippling if you don't know what you're going up against. Is if you don't solve the problem immediately, you've basically lost. Right? Like if they have their drop turn and they do a bunch of damage and then you don't respond in kind, the game is basically over. So that I think is one of the strongest facets of Gene Stealer cults. And hopefully we can give you guys some tips toward the end of this video for if you find yourself up against the GSC, to not get overwhelmed by their drop turn, because there's a lot of things you can do to help mitigate that kind of thing.
Definitely. I was hoping you could drop in there, talk a little bit about the particulars of what blips are and what they do to aggressive matchups to sort of fundamentally turn the game on its head, especially something like Blood Angels or World Eaters, where that first turn rush is really what they're trying to go for.
Right. Yeah, definitely missed that. Sorry. So yeah, blips are a GC mechanic. Basically what they are is a little token that they put on the board during the deployment step. Tyler's got one. He's pretending to be a pirate right now. It's not working. So when they set up their army, they can do it in a whole bunch of different ways. They can put guys in deep strike. They can put them on the board normally, or they can deploy them as a blip. And a blip is basically just a representation of this could be any unit in my army. And then they have a couple ways to move them around, like some stratagems. But generally, it's kind of like I'll put 5 blips out, and then my 5 units that are blips can be any one of those blips. Very importantly, you can never move within 9 inches of a blip. You can't end within 9 inches of them. Your path can't go within 9 inches of them, is my understanding. You just can't go anywhere. You can't go within 9 inches of them at any point in time. So, if the GSC player just stands 3 inches back from their blip, and you're 9 inches from the blip, 3 + 9 is 12, and you can't declare that charge. So that is their method for blunting charges, and basically makes them not immune to alpha strikes, but it is very, very difficult to get a turn 1 very aggressive move on GSC. You are basically waiting for their drop turn in order to hit them, because they will not let you hit them on turn 1.
For sure. So let's jump into what exactly it is that is going to be hitting people, and talk about a couple of list ideas. Now, the core of the lists has not fundamentally changed. We're still talking about 30 bikes, and I think every single list you run into is going to have the same 30 bikes with 2 particular changes. The bikes are going to all have 2 quads with incinerators, and then they're going to have 8 dudes. There'll be a leader, and then there will be 2 dudes with grenade launchers, and then there will be 2 dudes on average with demolition charges. The demo charge is a really effective weapon. Some people will run more, some people will run fewer. I think 2 per squad is about the average. The bikes are crazy because they have every special rule in the game. They pregame move 9. They fall back, shoot, and charge. They move 14 inches. They have a 2 CP fire and fade, and they treat you as exposed while within 6. To run over crossfire and exposed real quick, because there's a lot of people listening who don't play GSC. Crossfire is literally the other side of the blip tokens. You apply a crossfire token in a number of ways, the biggest being the Nexos applies one in the command phase, and then in addition to that, you're getting one and thrown out every time you hit a unit. If my unit targets your unit with every single gun that it can, you can't split fire, and hits you with either 5 single damage attacks across any spread of weapons, or at 1 or more multi-damage attacks, D3 counting as multi-damage here, and the unit that was shooting had the crossfire keyword, which not all of them do, but most of them do, you get a token. And that token's going to stick around for the remainder of the player turn. It's going to do a number of things. First and foremost, it's going to give every other crossfire unit that targets the unit with the token +1 to hit. And then it's also going to key off a couple of other stratagems. And in addition to that, it's going to key off potential for exposure. To get exposure, you got to have a unit with a token. I want to say this again. To get exposure, you need to have a unit with a token. There is not a single way in the game to get the benefits of exposure in which the unit does not already have a token. Every single one of them keys off of a token. The old-fashioned way to get exposure is that I take my unit that wants to target your unit and draw a line that goes from any point of any model in that unit, goes across and comes into contact with any point in any model in another unit of mine, that I have true line of sight to, and somewhere across that line, there is one of any point of any one of the models in the target unit. And if there's any obscuring involved, if the line is going to cross an obscuring feature, one of those 3 units needs to be touching it. And you need true line of sight. So what this means is I can shoot across a wall with windows if the unit touching it is on the wall. That obscuring doesn't break it. Or obviously if I have true line of sight because one of my units is touching the wall. But it means that a solid wall is a really big problem for getting exposure, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later in how to deploy around getting exposure off on you in too many ways. There's 2 additional ways. There's a couple different ways to get exposure as well. Most of them involve the jackals. A jackal unit within 6 gets exposure, assuming you have a token, which is really big. And a jackal unit within 6 can also spend 2 CP at any point in the shooting phase to have all of your other units treat that unit that was within 6 of the jackals as exposed for the duration of the shooting phase, which is real big. And then you can also get it for 1 CP within 12 inches for a squad with industrial weapons, just for the industrial, which is a tag that means the cool stuff, basically. The seismics, the Adlin incinerators, the demolition charges. Not the special weapons, though. The regular flamers. I don't think Webbers. It wouldn't matter. And not the grenade launchers. But yeah, so the bikes provide that in a couple of different ways, and you're going to see them in basically the same loadout all the time. The neophytes, you're going to see, like I said, 20-man bricks, generally with shotguns, 4 seismics, 4 flamers, I think is going to win out as the most popular, and probably an icon. And they're going to have a bunch of different potential proficient plannings that I'll talk about when I read off the actual list. And then there's a pile of characters. You know what? I'm going to jump right in and just read you where my list is at right now. This is what I'm taking if I am playing mono GSC at the moment, which I think there's reasons to do and reasons not to do. One of the reasons to do it is that if you play in teams formats, guard is probably already taken. But it looks something like this. We take, for HQs, we've got an Acolyte Icon Ward and a Primus. The Icon Ward is the banner boy with a 6-inch bubble of resurrecting D3 dudes in your command phase for every one of those units. Be ready for that. We got 7 units of troops. This is a Troops Omens detachment in particular. And that's going to be 4 of those 20-man bricks of Neos, a 10-man brick of Neos, and 2 squads of Acolytes. Now, each of these bricks of Neos is a little bit different because they've each got a different proficient planning. 3 of them have shotguns and flamers. 1 of them has autoguns and grenade launchers. The autoguns and grenade launcher squad has From Every Angle, which is an ability that lets them, after I know who's going first, pick up a blip that they were deployed in and then arrive from strategic reserves a turn early instead of being in that blip. This is great because it allows you to get around the have half your army on the table restriction because they do start on the table. So that's 200 points of just extra reserves, and being able to arrive from outflank turn 1, really nice. Also, just generally being in outflank strategic reserves has other benefits. You know, the coming in outside of it at any distance while within an inch of your table edge, really great. And it's a nice, scary turn 1 threat. The other 3 squads that have shotguns, seismics, and flamers have 3 different proficient plannings. One of the ones you're always going to see on one of them is lying in wait. That means that they deep strike at 3 inches. GSC deep strikes at all sorts of different distances, but in general, everyone drops at 6 in shoots or 8 in charges. This squad drops at 3 in shoots, which allows for all sorts of shenanigans. Lucas and Nick have been traumatized into learning how to fully cover their 40mm chips of their objectives to prevent the squad from running in and yoinking primary, because God will they do that if given the opportunity to do so. They're also really good at getting behind things for exposures and whatnot. The other 2 squads, one of them has a perfect ambush, which I think you'll also see in almost every list. And this squad drops in at 6 inches to shoot. And when it does so, it picks a unit within 12, gives that unit a fake token, basically. And any shots that they put into that unit, and they don't all have to be into the same unit, they can split fire, but any shots that are going toward that unit with a fake token, treat that unit as cross-fired and exposed. And because there isn't a real token on that unit, if everyone in that unit targets the ambushed unit, they will then apply a real token to it by hitting it with a bunch of 1 damage and some multi-damage weapons. So that is a really effective way to go dig something out from behind a wall. Like we'll talk about later, being behind a solid wall is a really good way to avoid getting shot at. This is one of the GSC players' strongest ways to get around that. And it's also basically another token application, because in particularly MSU-style armies, getting tokens everywhere you need them can be a bit of a struggle. This unit is a must-have for making sure that one of the big units gets a token for free, and you can put your easier-to-apply tokens elsewhere. Fourth and finally for the neophytes is one of my personal favorites that I don't see people running nearly often enough, and they are missing out. And that is, this fourth squad has a Trap Sprung, which is the OG thing from way back in the day. Every GSC player knows about this. We've been taking it forever on melee units, but you're going to see later, I don't have any melee units, so I get to put it on a brick of neophytes. And what it is when I charge, I get to roll an extra die and drop the lowest. Simple as that. Nothing too complicated. It's 15 points. And you're like, Tyler, this is a brick of neophytes. They're guardsmen with guns. Why on God's green earth would you ever want them to charge? And why would you want them to set up at 8 inches back to be able to do so when they could just set up at 6 inches and cut better angles? You buffoon. Well, let me tell you, having a brick of 20 dudes that ram it into a charge and wrap things or sit on objectives or gum up move blocks is the quintessential GSC bullshit. It's phenomenal. Remember that all 4 of these units also have icons, so they're also getting D6 dudes back in the command phase. So they can get in, wrap a bunch of stuff up, hit a bunch of things, and then get killed back, and then come back. And we'll talk more about how to do that in the how to play the list section. But man, this unit is so much fun. If you're not taking it, start taking it. So yeah, that's them. And then the 5th unit of neophytes for me is a 10-man unit. And this is one that I'm not 100% on right now, but this is where my head's at. It's a 10-man unit with 2 seismics. And instead of any flamers, the other guys have got shotguns. So that might change, actually. I could switch them to autos, but they've got shotguns at the moment. And then there's 2 Webbers. Webbers are kind of weird. Oh, and there's grenade launchers in the From Every Angle squad. So I've got all 3 special weapons in here somewhere. Let's talk a little bit about why you'd want which one versus the others. Flamers are flamers. Nothing complicated about it. D6 auto hits at strength 4. Having exposure. Sorry, I didn't even say what exposure does. It gives +1 to wound and ignores cover within 12. Ignores cover, +1 to wound flamers. Just a really good little piece of tech to be digging through a lot of smaller stuff. It's also a really good way to make things like Groths and Harlequin troops and whatnot go away without having to allocate a lot of resources to them. These 4 dudes are just going to shoot over there, and that unit's going to go away. It's very nice. So they're really helpful. The grenade launchers are interesting because they provide a lot more range. They're 24-inch range and another D3 damage, which can be a nice little thing to have. The From Every Angle squad in particular often shows up turn 1, cutting a really extreme angle from really far away. So they like to just have a little bit more oomph at that kind of range. But also the frag isn't bad, especially into blastable targets to say, hey, here's 24 additional shots instead of 4d6 because it's automatic. Only strength 3 is a bummer, but I see the value in it because it's blast. Which obviously the flamers are not. Webbers are weird. This is the fun gun. If you like weird stuff, take lots of Webbers. What a Weber is it's a D3 shot blast. I hesitate to call it a flamer. It doesn't roll to hit. And it doesn't roll to wound either. Instead, for every attack roll that you make with a Weber, which is hopefully going to be 3 because you're hopefully shooting blastable targets, but maybe you're not, so it's D3, whatever. You're going to roll a single dice per shot, and you're going to roll against the strength characteristic of the unit. Not like with their melee weapons, just on the data sheet, what is their strength? And if you exceed that, they take a mortal wound, and we're done. And if you don't, nothing happens, and we're done. This is weird. They're 18-inch range, which is why they're on this little squad here, because this little squad here's main job is to help hunt infiltrators. They're nice into T4. They're better than grenade launchers into T4, and they're better than flamers strength 4, and they're better than flamers into specifically strength 4, toughness 5, which is Gravis basically, which is pretty popular. And they're also really good into AdMech, which is not exactly what most people are teching for right now, but having played that matchup, they're very funny there. If you have a friend that plays AdMech and you really want to beat them, take a lot of Webbers because they don't care about a 0-up save. You're strength 3, you're taking a bunch of mortal wounds. Kind of weird. There's no stratagems or anything about them, which is weird to me. I really thought there should be a Weber strat that slows people down or something. I think it'd be cool, but I digress. They're weird. They're kind of anti-synergistic because they don't benefit from the hit mods and the wound mods or anything like that. They can't get any of the damage mods. Like none of this is real, but they're interesting. So I'm a fan. So that's the 10-man. They don't have a banner. They don't have a proficient plan. They don't need anything. It's just 10 dudes with some guns. And then the 2 squads of acolytes. They've got 5 flamers split across them. One squad has 3, one squad has 2. Those flamers could, in theory, do some damage, but they're mostly there if I'm not taking R&D to apply tokens, because 2d6 auto hits, needing a 5 in total. Pretty reliable way to get a crossfire token. And if you roll like a 3 and a 1, you can always CP the 1, especially because we're playing FLG. So you can fast roll your dice. It's a good token generation, but it's also like 6 points. They're mostly there to R&D. Excuse me. And one of those squads has the other proficient planning that you got to be ready for, which is Excavate. Lucas, you want to talk a little bit about what Excavate is and how it can change the matchup into other players?
Yeah, for sure. Excavate is one of the proficient plannings that the GSC player in the pre-battle ability step, we'll talk about the implications of that in a second, chooses a piece of terrain that's, I think it's an area terrain feature on the board, and it loses a bunch of traits and gains a bunch of traits. The important ones are it loses light cover and it gains difficult ground. So this piece of terrain, you won't get +1 to save from it anymore, and you will be -2 to move when you go through it unless you have fly. So it's a great way to kind of limit the mobility of some of the slower armies that are out there, especially things without fly.
Definitely. It's also a really effective way to remove cover from a piece where you expect your opponent to park a lot of stuff in one place. And the Blood Angels in particular, they love to ball up their army and sit in a ruin. And again, if you're within 12 with exposure, you don't have to worry about that because you'll ignore all forms of cover. But there are definitely times when it's just nice to not have to worry about getting exposure off to get through a really tough armor save, because this army does not have a lot of AP to go around. It just doesn't. It does also remove Nick's favorite keyword from terrain features. It removes defensible, which is real nice if you're concerned about a lot of Overwatch.
It's real sad.
Yeah. It also removes inspiring.
Oh shit! It's over for you Imperial dogs.
Yeah, so that's a lot of fun. Expect to see that a lot. It's also, as a niche use, it's really nice in that it is resolved in the pregame actions phase. So one of the really complicated parts of playing this army, or any army in Omens right now, and this always seems to come up in the later side of an edition, I don't know, this feels like this happens a lot, is that the infiltrating, the scout deploying, the forward deploying, the null deploying, whatever the hell you want to call it, the deploying outside your deployment zone meta is getting bonkers again. I hate when this happens because it is a part of the game that does not get enough attention from Games Workshop and from balances and FAQs, and yet ends up being really weird. So one of the things that this army tries to do generally is have bikes pregame move, normal move, and just shove your opponent in the corner and ask them politely not to leave. Which is really great because it means you're going to score a lot of points because they're not standing on objectives and you are. But one of the best ways to blunt that is to have dudes out in front that are 9 inches away from you so that when you make your pregame move, you have to stop basically right on the edge of your DZ. Bummer. The especially bummer part of it, though, is if you're playing someone like Guard, you can do that with Scout Sentinels, or Ultramarines that can do it with lots of things. They're Marines, Invictors, or Incursors, actual infiltrators, what have you. And then can redeploy 3 units later. So they say, all right, cool, make your pregame move. And then maybe they've got some other pregame move. And then make your pregame move, and you do your thing. And then they pull the Sentinels out of the way. That's a bummer. But Excavate gets around that a little bit because it says, all right, cool, my first pregame action is I excavate that ruin over to you. And now they have to pull their stuff if they're going to redeploy, and it just adds one more to the title. It doesn't come up often, but it's a nice thing to have in the bag. It also means that you don't have to make your pregame move until after the Blood Angel player has, for example, and whatnot. It's just generally a really nice thing to have around. So there's Excavate. Moving on down onto the we'll do elites last. Moving on down to the fast attack section. We've got the 3 squads of bikes, like I told you about, and I've got something a little bit weird here. A lot of people really like to run a squad of 10 pure strain gene stealers with They Came From Below. And They Came From Below is a really funny proficient planning. We're talking about all the plans today because they're all really good. And it's really funny because it's a pregame move that is not a pregame move. And by that I mean the specific way it works is that when you go to reveal your blips, which we haven't mentioned this, by the way, this is either at the start of your command phase if you go first, or the end of your opponent's movement phase if they go first, after any reinforcement shenanigans they may have. There's no way around blips other than psychic phase jumping. The moment they show up from the blip, and when they do so, the first model has to be within an inch of the center, and the rest within 6 of that guy. Holy. When they show up from the blip, they immediately make a normal move, which for pure strain stealers is 8. It's 9 if they're Twisted Helix, which some people still play. And that means they show up, they move 8. There's a 24-inch gap between you and your opponent, theoretically. They move 8. In your movement phase, they move 8. They've gone 16. You auto-advance 6 for a CP. They've gone 22. They're 2 inches off the line, and they're charging, because Steelers advance and charge. Or if they're Twisted Helix, there's 0 inches off the line, and they're charging. Or if you're playing Sweep and Clear, they're in your DZ, and they're charging. It's very nice. I have taken this unit out of this and all of my lists because I don't think that it gets its points worth. It's very expensive. And it's very good at killing a specific set of things, but there's a lot of matchups where I just don't get great utility out of it. And by not taking this unit, I can instead put this upgrade on one of my bike squads. So 2 of my bike squads have no plans, and one of them has They Came From Below. And that squad also picks up a 3rd demolition charge to take maximal advantage of this. Now, you may be asking yourself, Tyler, why the hell would you want a bike squad that pregame moves from a blip? Don't they all pregame move anyway? Why are you doing this? Nick, do you understand why I'm doing this? Can you tell people what's going on here?
I'm trying to remember.
I realize you may not have actually played into this yet.
No, I remember you briefly talking about it, and I
Gotcha.
forget the implications.
Lucas has seen the value of this. What's
I
the
have
implications,
indeed.
Lucas?
Well, first of all, their movement of 14 is better than the movement of 9 you would get from the pregame move normally, because you pregame 9 normally with the other squads of bikers.
Yeah, they pregame 9. They go from the blip. They go 14.
I think the other thing is, aren't they the only squad that can get the rerolls from the Nexos if he's on the board because of the timing of when they cut? Oh no, because the other squads are actually on the board.
Yep.
Does that Sorry to interject you.
There's some other reason, but I'm not.
Does the normal
Go for it,
pregame
man.
move have to stay 9 away from enemy models?
Oh,
They
yeah.
both do.
Okay.
Neither of these gets it's around that. What this does is it, in addition to the 5 extra inches, which don't get me wrong, that's really big. Lucas will tell you that one of the best ways you can play against GSC is to deploy 5 inches behind the line, assuming you're 24 inches apart, because this prevents first turn demo charges. This gets around that entirely by moving 5 extra inches. And if you're deploying 10 inches behind the line to avoid getting demo charge turn 1, first of all, that's a terrible decision. But second of all, I love that. Please stay 10. That's not possible on most on Dawn of War. But the timing of it makes everything a little bit weird. What it makes weird is that if I go first, it guarantees that whatever infiltrating nonsense you're doing, if you're pulling back, if you somehow, if you're playing Tau and you've blocked me out with a big unit of stealth suits and you've pregame moved 3 different units of crude hounds before doing Exemplar of the Cow Yawn, doesn't matter. Stop it. I'm getting to pregame move last, which means that your little rats are not preventing me from doing it, or if they are, they're dying, which is great. And secondly, it happens if I go second is where it gets really fun, because it means I already know where my opponent is, and I know where they can and can't be. So suddenly, oh, you're done moving? We saw this, we had a practice game at World Leaders where this came up really big, where the World Leaders player realized that they could not charge me turn 1. So they just advanced with everything, and they don't have any guns. And they said, cool, I'm going to stand here. And I said, all right, cool. I can now move 14 up and stay just 9 off all your units that just advanced, and none of them can declare a charge against me. They just can't. Mind you, a 9-inch charge in the first place would be complicated, but suddenly I'm 9 away from those dudes, knowing where they ended up after their advance rolls, and then moving 14, as opposed to having to be more conservative and prevent getting charged elsewhere. So that's huge. And finally, it gets around abandoned sanctuaries. This works with the Steelers as well, but it's really good on the bikes because the bikes have to apply pressure, and I can get away without having the Steelers because of this. And the reason for that is that abandoned sanctuaries prevents pregame moves. This is not a pregame move. This is either during my command or your move phase. And it can be really great for that. In particular, on sanctuaries, it can be very funny. No, that doesn't work actually. Never mind. But it can be a really good way to get out and involved and having people into their deployment zones before stuff gets messy. Michael Sarapata asks what cult we're playing. I realize I should have mentioned this a long time ago. We are playing a Myriad cult here, which is to say a custom cult. with 4 traits. Now, 2 of these you will find absolutely everywhere, and then 2 of them are sort of up to flavor. There's a number of options. The one you'll find absolutely everywhere, first of all, is industrial affinity, which is to say that on all of my industrial weapons, which is to say the seismic cannons, the Adelan incinerators, and the demolition charges, and I believe that is it. I gotta stop saying the fun stuff because it's really just those 3 weapons. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, it's just the 3 weapons. And I forgot that last night. That totally would have come up the other day. That the jackals as well, their melee weapons are industrial, so they can't take -1 to hit. When did that come up? Oh, the fire warriors. They threw a photon grenade. Anyway, I digress. For all those weapons, I ignore all ballistic skill, weapon skill, and hit modifiers for them, which is real big. Everyone's going to take that if they're playing custom cult. And the second one that everyone's going to take is accustomed to turmoil, which is army-wide baby transhuman. You cannot wound anything in the army on 2s, which for an army made of 100 T3 or 90 T3 dudes and like 60 T4 dudes is real good.
Comes up every game all the time.
Every single activation. There's so much strength 6+ around here. And one of the major benefits of this army is how much it blunts anti-tank weapons. We are in a meta of multi-meltas. Every Marine player has melta guns coming out of their ears. Every Votan player has beams coming out of their eyeballs. It is big shots that mess people up sitting. It's super popular. Tau players are running Riptides like they're going out of style. Like it's freaking 2019 again. Big shots are very popular. And to say, all right, cool, your big shots, not only do they, if they kill a dude, kill a 6-point rat, or maybe a 12-point rat on a bike, 15 points, I guess, these days. In addition to that, they're only doing it 2/3 of the time. You cannot wound me on 2s. It is so funny.
Yep.
It's great to Blood Angels as well. A lot of plus, just stop. Get some help. Nothing you can do.
No +1 to win for you.
Yeah, none of that. Stop it. It's not going to help you. So that's great. There's nothing in the game that gets around transhuman, which is really nice. So that's really useful. Again, those are each 1/4 of my cult trait. And then the last 2 where we have some options. Now, let's talk about what I'm doing, and then we'll talk about what other people are doing. What I am doing is the 3rd one is War Convoy, which I think is also pretty darn popular. 6-up Feel No Pain for the bikes. It would also work on vehicles if they have those. I don't. Excuse me. That's real great because now the bikes are -1 to hit in all phases at all times, baby transhuman, and 6-up Feel No Pain. And they're 2 or 4 wounds apiece. And they fall back, shoot, and charge. And with the icon, they're regrowing D3 dudes a turn. This is so slippery. This might be the slipperiest unit of the game. Allocating your attacks properly to make sure that these dudes go away in basically a single activation is a mess. And you will count your lucky stars if you manage to mess that up because it will feel like such a waste of an activation. Man, I am talking a lot. So
the other thing to note is that the 6-up Feel No Pain specifically facilitates that unit surviving excellently, especially for only 1/4 of your trait. That's why I think everyone should probably take that. It's just super good.
Definitely. It's real solid because there's so much damage 2 and damage 4 out there, which are what this unit is terrified of, and even some damage 3. You'll just hit 2 6s sometimes. It happens. Great trait. And then the 4th one, and I think this is where there's the most controversy. I am taking Alien Fury, which is +1 pile-in and consolidate. I think this is incredible. It particularly facilitates the way that I like to play the game, which is a lot of let's get everyone in combat, let's have everyone touching stuff, let's have everyone piling and consoling in weird ways to make funny things happen. A lot of combat jank, a lot of shenanigans, a lot of move blocking, a lot of demolition charges in combat. These are all things that are very facilitated by this. Because 8 inches is just so much more than 6 inches, right? Like 6 inches seems like plenty. It seems like a really good amount. And then you experience 8 inches for the first time and it just changes your life. It's such a world of difference to go from 6 inches to 8 inches. I really like it. You have something to say?
I'm disappointed in you.
Anyway.
All right. What, like, quick side note here, what are the other options? Because like that costs for like the custom cult, it's like 4 points you get to choose, and some are 2, some are 3, some are 1. Like, what other options are even worth considering over extra pilot and console?
Definitely. So the extra pylon console is my personal thing. This is something that Innes tells me I'm stupid about on a regular basis. I think he's wrong. Innes really likes sixes to wound in melee are +1 AP, which to me seems like an absolute waste of space on the list. It's better now that the bikes have melee, and if you're still taking but basically we were taking that in the past for just the pure strains, who are generally a one-shot gun. Maybe they return to the shadows and pull off a second activation, but generally they fought once, and in that one fight they have 40 attacks, they get 34 hits, they get 6 sixes to wound. So you were spending a quarter of your trait to take 6 attacks from AP3 to AP4 that are 1 damage? I think it's horrible, personally. And it doesn't work on the demolition charge thrown in combat because that's not a melee attack, that's a ranged attack. So so maybe it's okay on the Jackals. If you like it and you get utility out of it and you think that combat shenanigans are for babies, that's fine. Do your thing. You can take that. Make sure you remember it, but it definitely has its utility. There's 2 other options that I see running around. Michael, we're taking any question you throw at us. Go for it. The 2 others that are thrown around is dropping both the pile console and also the 6-up feel no pain on bikers. You can take both of those out and you can replace them with advance and remain stationary through the shooting phase. This, I think, is much more compelling than that one is. And you're like, why does this matter? Don't you already ignore penalties on stuff? Yes, it basically lets you do 2 things, which are advance and fire demo charges and advance and fire seismic cannons.
Both of which are huge.
Yeah, this is like
those weapons. Those weapons otherwise have a very defined threat range, right? Like you were saying, I can just measure out how far your demo charge model is going to move and stay outside of 20 of him. But if I have to stay outside of 20 plus D6, I mean, it's a little more. It gets a little spookier.
And especially with 1 CP auto advance 6, like you have to stay outside of 30 hard stop. 30 is also the hard stop range for seismic cannons at the moment. They move 6, they shoot 24. That's it. They're heavy. They're not advancing and firing. And something that we'll talk about later is you can definitely play outside that range if you're careful. Mind you, that generally means that the GSC player has made a mistake. If you're able to play with that, they're probably playing a little bit too cagey if that's a meaningful decision. But it's a very big trade-off, and I completely understand people who choose that set instead of the Feel No Pains and the better piles and consoles. It doesn't facilitate my particular playstyle quite as nicely, but it is really good. You have something to comment on that, Nick? No? Okay, cool. I'm going to test that out some more in the future also because I think it's really interesting. I think the 6-up Feel No Pain is too, like, if it were just trading out the 4-inch pile console, I would absolutely go for it. But I do love that 6-up Feel No Pain dearly, so it'll require some more testing. I'm still landing on the 4 1-pers, but if you like the sound of that and you want to go fast, by all means, go fast. The other one, and the one that I do not understand quite as well, and I honestly need to pull this up so I don't quote it wrong, is it's one of the 3 first. And I think the people who are taking just Industrial Affinity and so they were giving up both the Pile console, the Feel No Pain, and I think they give up the Baby Transhuman to make the 3 for work. And that is, I haven't seen people taking Fall Back and Shoot at -1, but I think that's worth considering. Though it is, oh no, where is it? Is it a 2-fer? Not that one. Not this one.
Nick, is Tyler a robot for you?
Yes.
Tyler, you've gone full robot mode. Maybe.
Oh dear.
I don't know.
Maybe
Internet seems to still be going
connection.
strong. Hopefully, the stuff is recorded locally, so it shouldn't be an issue for the pods and stuff. Apologies if live viewers are seeing things poorly. Is it still bad?
No, it's better now.
Okay, cool. Yeah, a little rubber banding, so it goes. I've seen deep supplies get taken, which is a 2-fer for reroll a single wound every time you attack, which seems okay to me. I thought there was something about poison. Oh, toxination. There it is. This is only a 2-fer. and that is 6 is to hit auto wounded melee. I don't against non-monsters vehicles. I don't like this at all. I see it. I don't know why you're taking it. But it's not for me. So it's out there though. You may run into it. But I digress. So those are sort of your big picture options. In my mind, the best is those 4, and the second best is trading out the 2 for advance and fire. It may actually be properly the best. You go ahead and test whatever sounds like fun for you, and we'll see how that goes. So that's the Cult Creeds, which has been in the middle of this list. To finish out the list, we got to talk about the 4 elite characters. There's actually 2 different ways to make this detachment legal. For every character, you actually get a free slot for a character, but then there's also the 3 bonus elite slots in the Arks detachment that are only for characters. So take as many characters as you want is the moral of the story. And you're going to want a lot because our book has, I think, 19 data sheets and 13 of them are characters or something silly like that. So you're going to want some characters, and you're going to give up some assassinate points if you're not careful. So those 4 elites are the Sanctus with a sniper rifle, the Nex, and then the other 3 I all give relics. So it's the Nexos with cranial inlay, who you will always see, the Clamavis with wormtooth rounds, who you will always see, and the Calamorph with wormtooth rounds, who you always see, and the Clamavis with the voice of the Liberator, which you will not see as often, but I'm going to make a really good case for in a second. Starting with the Sanctus, super straightforward. He's a sniper. He auto hits. He's 36 inch range, or maybe he's 30. I think he's 36. It's fantastic. It just applies a token. It's strength 5, AP 3, damage 2. It always ignores cover. If you already have a token, Q2 is exposed. It's nice. Super great 8 unit. And then there's a 1 CP stratagem for if he does damage, including the mortal that he does in a 4-up to wound, nat 4-up, to a character, roll 3 dice. If you beat their leadership, they lose all their auras until your next shooting phase. And in addition to that, if they happen to be a wizard, they suffer perils of the warp. This is funny. Lucas, can you tell the viewers about why this is funny?
Do I have to?
Yes, you do, because you've suffered this fate too many times to not tell everyone about it.
So this rarely comes up because everyone command points their own perils when their wizards are low, right? But if your opponent makes you perils and your wizard is low, he blows up in the middle of your army because demons, jump into his brain or whatever. So this thing.
Explain the actual mechanics of how that works.
Sure, yeah. So when a wizard dies from perils of the warp, every unit within 6 inches of him takes D3 mortal wounds. So if your character wizard dies in the middle of your character castle, then all of your characters take D3 mortals. So this Sanctus is a little rat who loves sniping your psychers.
Yeah, Lucas has had this happen to many a weird boy. It's a pain in the tail. It's also really good into a lot of other big wizard characters that might be floating around. Really useful into demons. As we'll talk about in a sec, the Calamorph is another really good sniper. So it just allows a couple more wounds to trickle through, which can be really helpful. And just turning off auras can be in and of itself super useful if you're able to pull this off. Obviously, the leadership thing makes it a little more challenging when they're not orcs who are a weird boy. It's a weird boy leadership 6, Lucas.
Yep.
Yeah, he's just a boy.
But you can get this off on the Silent King, or you can get this off on Gilliman, or you can get this off on a Foul Blightspawn. Oh man, it's a whole lot of fun. Kim says he would be fine with this after having taken the most damage in the game from an orc psychic phase. But yeah, so it's also really good into Gaz. Anything, and a lot of these characters are not as popular these days, but you'll run into them. And being able to say that aura doesn't exist is a really nice thing to have. And again, it's only 1 CP. You can only use it once per target per game, so you can't just like slowly keep reloading and just perilsing until eventually the dude goes down. It's great into warlocks. Anyway, it's a really useful strat to have around. So that's him. The other 2 are shockingly somehow more complicated. The Kellermorph is a wild piece of army. I don't want to call him tech because everyone knows about him, everyone takes him, but he does some silly things. He has 6 shots at 18-inch range for some reason that are strength 5, AP 1, 1 damage, and every 6 to wound is a mortal wound in addition. Every hit, he's BS 2+, so every hit generates an additional shot. So he can get up to 12 hits with these 5-1-1 sniper shots, which is just silly. And remember, he can benefit from exposures. He's going to be +1 to wound. The 6s are nat 6s, so you're not getting more of those with the exposure, but still you're getting a lot. And then, after he shoots, he gets to move 6 inches. Even if he arrived from deep strike that turn, it specifically says so on his data sheet, only unit in the game that can do this, it is nonsense. So we're talking about dropping in 6 away, moving 6, we're 0 away. We got to say an inch away because it's not a charge move, but go stand on that objective.
What else can he do after arriving from reserve and then fire and fading, Tyler?
Yeah, so if he drops in at 8 inches and then shoots his 18-inch range guns, he can then move 6 inches and be 2 inches away, and then he can charge and have a 2-inch charge out of deep strike.
I don't know why GW has the I don't know why GW has this like habit of forgetting that fire and fade units and shooting armies can still charge, but they never put that qualifier in such books that these units can't charge.
Yeah.
They didn't do it with Tau. They didn't do it with GSC.
For the record, to GW's credit, the bikes can fire and fade, and their fire and fade stratagem, as can the Ridge Runners, and their fire and fade stratagem specifies that they cannot charge. But yeah,
that's good.
Guard, Erd, and Tau both have that, and then the Kellamorph has it as well.
Hilarious.
So he's very funny for that. And of course, that 6-inch move can do a lot of things. It can get him to charge. It can get him to go stand on an objective. It can get him behind safety, behind a wall. It can get him into a truck. If you're playing Goliaths, the best move is to have him get out of a truck 3, walk 6, shoot, move 6, get into another truck that's way up the table. And then now that there's someone embarked in that truck, it can huck its cache of demolition charges. It's glorious. There's so much shenanigans to be done with this dude. And here's one of the crazy parts that people forget about all the time. He loves to get stuck in, but you're like, oh no, but like then they're gonna like charge him or something. They're just gonna be stuck in melee. Well, 2 things. First and foremost, he has 2 CP shoot on death, which is hilarious just for him, which again, still snipes. So like one of the plays that we love to talk about with him is if you're playing into Leonidas or Leontis or whatever the guard Lord Solar dude is, that dude's toughness 4. So you win him on 3s. If he's exposed, you win him on 2s. You can drop in, shoot him. Maybe you kill him, maybe you don't, but maybe you do. Move 6, charge him. He will cut you in half in combat. You don't even have to take your emblems if you don't want to. And then shoot on death and shoot him again. And now he's dead. He's gone. Dunzo. If they take Ursula, boom, Ursula's dead, charge. It's hilarious. Anyway, there's a lot of shenanigans. But something that people forget about with this move is that it also can be a fallback instead of a normal move. So you can charge in, get stuck in combat, have someone run up like they're going to charge you, or shoot in combat, and then move 6 inches out. It's very funny. It doesn't let him dodge Overwatch. It only works in the shooting, or dodge charge. It only works in the shooting phase, but the fallback can mess with people as far as when they're trying to put what where. It also means that having him in combat tagged doesn't prevent them from getting shot at. If they tag him but don't wrap him, he just makes a fallback move out. I have to double check the wording on Desperate Breakout. You might be able to use that in the stream. Can you check that for me, Nick? What the wording on Desperate Breakout is, if you can use that, if it has to be in the movement phase. Thanks. But it prevents him getting tagged from being a way to prevent other things from getting shot or losing his shots. So he's real great. We haven't even talked about Wormtooth rounds yet. Wormtooth rounds are a silly relic. Instead of 6 shots at 5-1-1 with sniping and mortals, he gets 3 shots without sniping and without mortals, but those 3 shots are 6-3-3. Boom. And they still generate an additional shot after every hit. They're also not pistols anymore. They're heavy, so you do need a token on what he's targeting in order to hit on 2s instead of 3s. And he's not industrial, so he doesn't ignore modifiers. But that results in him just obliterating something, which is real spicy. Nick, you got something for us in Desperate Breakout?
Yeah, Desperate Breakout says use this stratagem in your movement phase.
Ah, bummer. See, that's not a trick. This has literally never occurred to me until just now. But don't try that. It doesn't work if he's wrapped. But if he's not wrapped, falls back just fine. So that's the Kellamorph. He can shoot all sorts of stuff. At 6-3-3 with exposure means he is a heavy infantry hunter. This dude's favorite target in the game, I think, is Squighog Boys, followed closely by 8-bound that don't have their Feel No Pains up yet.
Or Gravis, anything like that. Any 3-wound model that's toughness 6 or 5. It's
Botan bikes.
Slaughter. Oh yeah, absolutely. And being able to show up at 18 instead of 12 means he can actually shoot the bikes as well without getting auspexed. Though also, as a reminder, when you're trying to avoid auspexes with this, auspex happens at the end of the phase after everyone has dropped in and they only target one unit. So if you put a character behind a unit of 5 rats, they cannot auspex the character, and they usually don't want to auspex the 5 rats. We'll talk about how to dodge auspex a little bit more in a minute. So that's the Calormorph. He's great. The Nexos with Cranial Inlay, and you'll always see him with Cranial Inlay, he does a lot of things. He applies a Crossfire token to any unit, no restrictions, as long as you're on the battlefield in your command phase. And as a reminder, every time I say in your command phase, what I actually mean is the moment they arrive from Deep Strike, because GSC get to do that. But he applies a token, and then he additionally gets 2 in your command phase or on the drop. Pick a character within 6 that has to be a Primus, a Clamavis, or a Jackal Alphys, and then picks a unit anywhere on the table and says that unit counts as within range of your auras. And if it is still the actual command phase, this doesn't work off the drop. DM me if you want to understand exactly why, but it just doesn't. He can also apply a command phase ability, specifically reroll 1s to wound from the Primus or the Clamavis's command phase ability, which I'll talk about in a sec. And the Relic lets him do that twice, and it also lets him farm CP on a 5-up on your expenditures. Now, what this means in practice is that if he drops in at the same time as 2 squads of Neophytes on the other side of the table, those 2 squads of Neophytes are rerolling 1s to hit, which is just a really great bit of additional output boost without having to manage your auras. It's real good. So there's the Nexus. And then last but not least is my boy, the Clamavis. Lucas, I want to see if you can name everything that the Clamavis does for 45 points.
Okay. In your morale phase, you pick an enemy unit within 12, and you roll 3 dice and compare to their leadership. If you beat it, you remove OBSEC from that unit or turn off any actions it's doing and prevent it from doing actions next turn. Mm-hmm. Is that ability number 1?
That's correct. You nailed every bit of that.
Ability number 2 is the point and click command phase ability to action and shoot. Or is that
half of it?
Okay, and the other half is ignore the effects of combat attrition, just flat out.
Correct. Note that command phase 1 is an and the morale phase 1 is an or. Lucas got both of those correct. Just doubling down on that for listeners. What else does he do?
He is it the Relic now, or does he do anything else natively?
He does one more thing on the data sheet before you bring up the Relic.
He auto pistols you.
One more really important ability.
He hits you 4 times with his pimp cane.
He has a 12-inch bubble of no deep strike.
Oh, yeah, I forgot about that. Wow, he does all of that?
For 45 points.
Oh my god, okay.
And then you spend 1 CP on a Relic that does what?
Increases the range of the point and click command phase and morale abilities to 18. And he now has a 12 inch aura of +1 leadership.
Yes, that is correct. That's the voice of the Liberator. This dude is
liberated.
Insane. Absolutely. You'll notice that at no point in time did Lucas mention the phrase line of sight with either of those abilities. Get out a tape measure right now, wherever you are. If you're listening to this, if you're driving, pull over, get out a tape measure and measure out 18 inches. And then put a 32 mil base. And then in the other direction, measure another 18 inches. This dude has infinite range, as far as I can tell. It's very silly. Turning off OBSEC, incredible. I've got dudes showing up at 3. I've got dudes making 8-inch charges or even 7-inch charges because the icon ward can plant the banner. On 3 dice, pick the 2 highest. I've got bikes going in that don't themselves have OBSEC but would love to outnumber you. And at the end of the day, you not having OBSEC is just going to make life a lot easier. You're also probably trying to do actions because we're playing 40k, and 40k involves a whole lot of actions these days. If you're playing Tau, you have marker lights. What if I told you that that unit could not fire marker lights next turn? You'd probably be pretty bummed. Maybe you're playing Chaos Knights and you want to use Storm of Darkness. What if I told you? No. You've got Gretchen that would like to get the good bits next turn. No.
Yeah.
You've got sisters.
If you're
that are doing
playing
sacred
Votan
ground.
and sorry.
No. What if you're playing Votan, Nick?
What if you're playing Votan and you have 2 units that can banners and you say no?
Spicy, right? There's a whole lot of possibilities here. And she is just like limitless flex. And then similarly, defensively, shoot and act is great because it means that I get an R&D without having to burn an acolyte squad on it necessarily. And then immune to combat attrition. And Lucas said, like I said, it's immune to combat attrition, not immune to combat attrition modifiers. This isn't, and they shall know no fear. This is, I fail morale, a dude flees, and we're done. Still check for coherency and stuff, but like no rolling a dice for every model, none of it. It doesn't happen, which is hilarious on a lot of these big units. And it basically means if you kill me down to 2 dudes, I don't have to worry about auto passing because I cannot roll a 1 or a 2. If you're playing demons, I cannot roll a 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. Whatever nonsense you've concocted, I'm mute. We're done. Naturally, like I said, this is a command phase ability, so you got to see the future a little bit to make use of it, but it's fantastic. And 18 away means that she can do both of these things from relative safety, because I'm going to have a lot of models between you and my character that's 18 inches back. I'll tell you that much. She's great. The +1 leadership aura is also really good. We have a really good demons matchup in general, assuming you can figure out how to deal with flamers. But she is lovely. Now, this is where I should bring up the other place where there is a lot of controversy in my mind in the high-level GSC community, which is that no one else takes this relic. Everyone tells me that I am silly for extending her ranges to 18 and grabbing +1 leadership, when instead I could be giving her Oppressor's Bane, which replaces her auto pistol with a 3-shot 4-2-2 that I don't remember if it rerolls or if it treats targets as crossfire and exposed. It doesn't matter. It's a 3-shot 2-damage weapon that will generate a crossfire token, is what it is at the end of the day. This is fine. I personally very rarely struggle with token generation. I can put tokens where I need them when I need them. And also you can get by without them a surprisingly large amount. Whereas is now suddenly she has to be within 12 to activate either of these abilities. I don't like it. I don't like it at all. It's very popular, and I think that if you take it out of your list and swap in Voice of the Liberator just once, you will never go back. Trust me, it's fantastic. I say this having played both of them a bunch. It's just better. The other thing to consider is she has a stratagem associated with her as well, kind of like the Sanctus does. Hers is way worse, but it's occasionally super clutch, so I think it bears mentioning, because if you're still listening to me talk about GSC 82 minutes later, or 72 minutes later, you probably want to hear about this. At the end of your movement phase, if she has line of sight and proper 12-inch range to an enemy vehicle, she can roll a die, and on a 3+ with no modifiers, no rerolls, that vehicle counts as being down a bracket. My understanding of the interaction here is that if they use a fight on top bracket strat, and this says they're down a bracket, they end up at middle bracket, which can be really nice for wraps. It can be really nice for messing with ballistic skill. It can do a lot of cool stuff. It's a CP that only does something on a 3-up, so I don't recommend building a plan around it. But fortunately, it's in the movement phase, so you know if it's happened already. Something you should know about. It's a cute little piece of additional shenanigans. So that's her. Okay, that's the list. To recap, 6 characters, 30 bikes, 90 neophytes, 10 acolytes. It's very heavy on the ground. It's got a lot of models. They're dropping in silly ways. Let's talk a little bit about how it plays. So you need to keep, like I said, there are 7, 8, 9, 10, 13. There are 16 units in the army. So you have to start 8 of them on the table, which means you need the 2 squads of bikes that can't go in blips, and you need 6 blips. Previous iterations of my list needed 5. This one needs a full 6. One of those 6 is going to be your From Every Angle squad, so they're a bit of a freebie. One of them is going to be the bike squad, so they're a bit of a freebie. But that then means you need 4 different units need to start the battlefield on the table. The Primus starts on the table. The Icon Word starts on the table. And then you need to figure out which of your 4 support characters starts on the table. Generally, I like it to be, or a small squad. I like it to be a small squad whenever possible. If I can get away with having 5 acolytes on the table in a spot that they can walk over in R&D, or that they can provide some lookout serve for others, that's really nice. But also it's often the Kellermorph or the Nexos. Having the Kellermorph on the table just means more activations from him, which is always great, and he can do so from relative safety. Starting the Nexus on the table means that he's not making phone calls to hand out rerolls turn 2, but he is applying Crossfire tokens turn 1 and also is making phone calls turn 1 to the bike squad that's getting sent off and also CP regen turn 1. So it's kind of a trade-off. Do with that what you will. Turn 2, you've got an important decision. So then turn 1 comes around, you're going to try to slam people back, push them as far back as possible, deploy aggressively. You want to sit in the midfield. It's really easy with this army to sit in the backfield and then be surprised when none of your auras quite work. The further up your castle is, the better. Don't get your dudes killed, though. You got to be careful. It's a balancing act. Turn 2, you drop in. And how much you want to drop in with is really a matchup-to-matchup situation. It's a really challenging call to make. Because if everyone shows up, you're missing out on some ambush points potentially, and you're really banking on it working. But there's a lot of situations where you don't have a choice in the matter because, like Lucas was saying, you need to hit them so hard that they cannot hit you back and end the game on the spot. It's not fun, honestly, when you have to do that, but there are a lot of matchups where you sort of just have to make your target acquisition correctly and go for it. Drop in, hit everything that you can. And when you're dropping in, you got to make a couple decisions. The big one is, where are the neophytes going? Whether you're splitting wide or focusing everything to one flank is the first big question. And then once you've decided that, how many neophyte squads are setting up in range of the icon versus going deep is another challenging question that you got to figure out. Generally speaking, I try not to send more than 2 squads deep, or maybe 2 squads and the 10-man. That's also sometimes acceptable. I really want to have some squads that are getting rerolls from staying next to the Primus and also can have a lot of regeneration happening. Ideally, this is all happening dead center board, and then I can drop like 3 squads in the middle, and suddenly we're regenning and we're grabbing objectives and we're everywhere. That's a really good thing to have happen if you can make it work. So yeah, drop in, shoot a bunch of stuff. One of the big things with this army is that you want to make sure that you get every drop of juice out of it that you can at once, which means that every single bike unit is firing a demo charge. Every single unit is firing every single gun that it can, because you need all the bullets. It can be really easy to try to play a little bit more defensively, a little bit more cagey, and you end up losing like 15 or 20% of your firepower. Wrong decision, 9 times out of 10. Just don't. Go in, hit real hard, and pull people in multiple directions. Remember that a lot of people have to go stand pretty close to you to remove a brick of 20 dudes, and they have to remove 20 because you have an icon. So not removing 20 is not removing any. Try to anticipate what's going to be alive at the end of your drop turn and make sure that it has hard decisions to make and it wants to go backwards. If everyone gets to go in one direction and hit your castle, that's a bummer. If they have to go backwards to clear a squad, they're going to be in a much more uncomfortable situation. So yeah, you almost always keep a squad of acolytes back at least so you can get your RNDs later on. Getting RND on turn 1 is another thing that I'll mention. It's often more challenging than you'd anticipate, but it's really important. If you don't get an R&D on turn 1, you have to get one turn 5, and this is not a turn 5 army. This is an army that if it is turn 5 and you are getting a comfortable R&D, something has probably gone terribly wrong for one of you, and you are spending too many resources, or you already won the game. If you're looking to win a tight game, get an R&D turn 1. It's just necessary. Those are sort of the big picture swaths of what you're trying to do here. Talk about some micro plays. The fundamental problem that this army has is that it cannot fall back and shoot. You could spend 3 of your points to be allowed to fall back and shoot. Don't do that. Instead of falling back and shooting, everything in your power is going to go into making sure that you are not in combat at the start of your turn. And you're going to do that by dying or pulling out of combat. Now, sometimes that's really easy. They charge you with a squad of dudes that kill 10 dudes. And you're often going to be set up in these weird tendrils in order to get all of your angles and distances cut off. So if they kill 10 dudes, cool. And then maybe a couple more run to morale. You got like 6 dudes sitting in the back, including the icon. You're rocking and rolling. You're not in combat. Love that. Real good for you. Alternatively, there's the problem where they rush in, they charge a bunch of dudes, and they kill not that many of them. You know, they only fight with 1 dude or something, and only 3 or 4 dudes die. 2 or 3 more on the morale, you're still stuck in combat. This is where your new best friend comes in, which is unit coherency. Now, I'm going to assume that you're not playing with the WTC FAQ on this for a minute. If you play with the WTC FAQ, there's ways to get around this. DM me. It's a weird FAQ. But also you're playing WTC, so I assume you can figure out how to solve this problem. What it looks like is whenever you set up your squad, make sure that there is a bow tie somewhere in the squad. Doesn't matter where. Just any point where there is a singular model that is only within 2 inches of exactly 2 other models. And make sure that none of those 3 are your icon. Put your icon far away from that little bubble. What this means is that if they kill a single model, you can pull one of those 3 models, and suddenly you have a model that's only within 2 inches of one dude. And if there are fewer than 5 in the squad, there's a very different situation happening, but that means you're out of coherency. And when you're out of coherency, after you take morale checks, after you pull all models from morale checks, to be clear, you have to start pulling models until you're back in coherency. Mind you, there is nothing in the rules that specifies that you have to pull the models that are themselves out of coherency, because there is no such thing as a model being out of coherency. Coherency is a checkbox that is applied to a unit. Either a unit is coherent or a unit is incoherent. And if the unit is incoherent, you're going to remove models until you are coherent again. If that means that you pull every model except for a single model, that's fine. Just make sure that you are incoherent until that last pull. So I break my bow tie on the side, and then it's the morale phase. So everyone's done moving. And with that broken bow tie left in place, I'm going to pull every single model that's within 1 inch of my opponent. And then I'm going to pull the remainder of the broken bow tie so that all I have left is a coherent unit that is not in combat. Maybe my seismic cannons are dead. That's fine. I'm getting 2d6 to a max of 6 of them back because I'm standing next to my icons, or at least d6 of them. Maybe they're still alive. Really cool. Good positioning. Not a big deal either way. So that's the number one way to take advantage of this. If they kill some dudes. Now let's say that they don't kill some dudes. They just pile console after hitting someone else and end up tagging you. 2 ways to get around that. First question, is there anyone within 9 who has not yet fought who could kill a dude? If so, that's great. Pile 4, console 4, get them into combat. They now have to hit you. They'll kill a dude. You'll break a bow tie. Rocking and rolling. Let's say, however, that that's still not an option. Man, they are playing you like a fiddle. They have tagged a unit, and there is no way for you to get anybody killed. Wrong. Let me introduce you to the best stratagem in the book. That's a lie. But one of the best stratagems in the book, Reckless Demolitions, is a stratagem that most people read as throw a demo charge in combat. But it's not throw a demo charge in combat. It's use a grenade weapon in combat, which means any single model in your army can use this because everyone has frag grenades and demolition charges, basically. All the units that matter do, particularly neophytes. Frag grenade is D6 shots. Demolition charge is D3 shots. They're both blast, and it is a shooting attack, so you do get to take advantage of blast.
Really quickly, by demolition charge, you mean blasting charge.
Oh, sorry, blasting charge, not demolition charge. Yeah. Your neophytes do not all have demolition charges. That would be really something. When you use this stratagem, you hit on unmodified 2+. However, if you roll a single one, every single one you roll removes a model from the squad. So I huck my demolition charge. I've got a big squad coming in at me. I roll D6 shots, or if it's a big squad, 3 shots, or a really big squad, 6 shots. Great. If I roll a 1, I pull that model. We're good to go. Now I should note that this is another reason that the 4-inch pile console is really important, because the Primus as Captain Aura of reroll 1s to hit is not optional. It's not a may, it's a must. So you need to pile out of range of him. So do not set up your dudes less than 3 inches away from your Primus. Set them just within 6 to get the reroll 1s to hit, and then pile out of that. You can't console out of that, because if you're consoling, then you have to end coherently, which means you're not breaking. If you don't have blast, if it's just D6 shots, this has approximately 48% success rate, which 1 CP to basically roll a die, and on a 4-up, you get to fall back and shoot, is giga worth it in my book for this army. It's not always worth it necessarily. You know, your CP expenditure is up to you, but that's the big trick that not everyone knows about that you can take advantage of there. You can also, of course, CP one. If you're really desperate, you can CP one of the hit rolls. Try to get that one, but now you're really desperate. So I wouldn't personally recommend that. And it is Nat 2s. There's no way around the situation. It is what it is. If there were anyone who happened to have a rule that made you reroll successful hits against them, I'd be really happy to do it into that. But I don't know that there's any unit that does that right now. So that's how we're avoiding getting tagged. The other thing that you can do is you can also spend 1 CP to use overloaded fuel cells, which is it's the +1 damage in shooting or +1 strength in melee, but every hit roll of a natural 1 does a mortal wound to you. Now, this isn't necessarily quite as useful for the squad that's in combat, as it only works in industrial weapons, and none of the neophyte weapons are industrial, and the jackals already fall back, shoot, and charge. But if for some reason you needed a jackal to die because they had wrapped it, for example, and they hadn't killed any, so you couldn't pull out a coherency or whatnot, that's also an opportunity that you could use that offensively there. You can also use this offensively for my favorite version of this, which is show up with only the seismic cannons on the outside of the wall, spend a CP for that while you're not rerolling ones from the Primus, fire off 12 or 24 shots with +1 damage on them, and then break your bow tie in your own shooting phase, pulling all the dudes in line of sight in your own morale phase, and now you're behind a wall and getting potentially 2d6 to a maximum of 6 dudes back on your next command phase, which can regrow you onto an objective, or can regrow you back your seismic cannons, or what have you. It's a hilarious way to take advantage of this rule. There's a million other micro plays that involve this, but this should give you a good place to start as far as coherency shenanigans. They're real great. In the FLG currently, they're ruling that when you resurrect dudes, you can chain, but you have to double chain. Basically, they say check your coherency every single time you place a model. So the first guy shows up within 2 of 2 models. The second guy shows up within 2 of 1 of those models and 2 of the model you just placed. And now you've got 2 models that have been placed out to, so you can place the next one out 2 from them, etc., and build this sort of zigzag ladder out to grab an objective or whatnot. And these resurrections are happening in the command phase before the end of the command phase, which is when you score primary. So that can be a real little shenanigan machine. Be ready to use that and be ready to see that used against you. Okay. I've hit most of the major plays here. If you'd like to talk more about the specifics of this, check out our Patreon. Come talk to me, DM me on Facebook, whatever. I'm always down to talk bugs. But those are some of the big picture things that you got to be ready for. Okay. Anything that I've missed that you guys see me do a lot that is worth mentioning here?
Yeah, I think you got pretty in depth.
Yeah, sweet. So that's the basis of that. That's how to play the arm, basically. Let's answer these couple of questions that we have in the chat here, and then we'll jump into our segment on how to play against GSC, which I'm sure is what a lot of y'all are waiting for, because this stuff sounds pretty scary. All right. Michael asks, I know Myriad is the best choice, but what about Rusted Claw? One choice I've used is a 4-model unit of Jackals with 3 demo charges, and they came from below. 80 points for 3 demo shots on the first turn. The reference here is to, what is it, drive-by demolitions that lets you throw 3 grenades? Is that what it does? Let me double check that I have that right, because I don't want to misinterpret your question. Rusted Claw, drive-by demolitions, use this in your movement phase after Rusted Claw, unit from your arm makes a normal advance and falls back. 1 unit, it can shoot with a grenade weapon. When it does so, they can target it can be anything that you move within 6 inches of, and until the end of the phase, do not roll to determine the number of attacks. It's an automatic 6. Okay. So the 3 demo charges are 1 in combat, 1 with the drive-by, and 1 in shooting, which is really cool. This is really fun. Yeah. Can fit between infiltrators. Rusted Claw does have pseudo armor of contempt. Yep, they do treat AP 1 and 2 as 1 less. Biophagus can cover the accustomed to total. I don't believe in the Biophagus. He's not real. But this is really cool because this gets around infiltrators as a problem for you a little bit. Stratagem referenced the move. Yeah, it is in the movement phase. So you can run up, huck an auto 6 demo charge grenade at a squad of infiltrators that you'll be within 6 of, so you'll treat them as exposed, hopefully wipe them out, and then get to deep strike after that. That's really cool. I like that at play a lot. If you're playing Rusted Claw, totally go for that. Rusted Claw also has the super silly relic, right? Which is the bearer can shoot, charge, and cast after advancing and falling back, and he moves through models and terrain. This is hilarious. You put some Jackal Alphas and have her go to crazy places and cutting angles and shooting stuff. Just having fall back and cast is a really nice thing on a Magus. It's really, really cool. I quite like this as an ability. My first option, if you wanted to play a true cult, would be Hive Cult, followed by Twisted Helix, and then maybe Rusted Claw. Bladed Cog is also really interesting. There's some Bladed Cog aberrant lists that I think are worth looking into. I'll talk a lot more about this kind of thing in a couple weeks when I'm allowed to talk about GSC again at all. But that's a lot of fun. I don't like the Biophagus mainly because you're all like playing your characters conservatively with 6 is already hard. Going up to 7 will be a lot, but obviously he'd fit in for something else. This person asked, who wins GSC or Hail? I think Eldar is one of GSC's best matchups. Obviously, they have one of the best Auspexes in the game. Playing around Auspex is something I haven't talked about at all yet. It's complicated. Staying outside of 12 is an option. But the better option is playing angles. Because if all of your dudes can see exactly one of their dudes, then that unit can Auspex, and that one dude can shoot you, and then all of your dudes can shoot him. That's the main trick to not getting Auspexed into oblivion. Obviously, that's going to be terrain in specific and dependent, but that's the main way to avoid getting Auspexed. Show up outside of 12, cut weird angles, or just accept that it's happening. A lot of times you can mitigate it somewhat and say, cool, I'm getting Auspex. This unit's going to take a bunch of damage. I'm going to cut down to just some dudes behind a wall with a banner and be happy with my life. Because there's not a lot of Auspexes out there that kill a full 20 Neos through baby trans. So I don't think that Auspex is that big of an issue. Also know what units can and can't do it. In Marines, it's only infantry. In Votan, it's only bikes and trains. Is that right, Nick?
Technically, the Hearthkin Warriors could. It's any unit with the scanner keyword, and you can buy scanners.
Is that the troops or the Terminators?
Hearthkin Warriors is the troops.
Troops, okay. The troops could do it if you bought the right upgrade for them.
Are the Terminators, and they cannot
gotcha.
Aspects.
Yeah. Wouldn't matter in the first place because you're never dropping within 12 of them because they're silly. But if you plan someone with double Terminators, sure, get in close, make it happen. So that's sort of the thing there. Eldar really don't like GSC because they're a bunch of T3 dudes that benefit from standing behind walls and not getting shot at until they get to hit you first. If you hit them first, they're in trouble. And your secondaries are a lot better than theirs. So drop in, shoot them all to pieces, profit.
Also,
if you take a webway. Mm-hmm.
No, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
Okay. If they take a webway gate, park a Clamavus in the middle of it, and it's useless, it's very funny. What else you got, Lucas?
Just in general, being toughness 3 is not really where you want to be when the opponent's army is full of strength 4 and 5 plus 1 to wound. So
yeah.
Eldar kind of melt to them shots.
Eldar also in general have a lot of units that kill 10 to 15 neophytes and not a lot of units that kill 20 neophytes.
Yep.
Also, the Flamers make our Overwatch a lot scarier. So anything other than a Banshee unit had better have a really good plan if they're going to plan on charging. Eldar also want to play a slow, reserved, pick you apart, play at the corners kind of game generally, and that's just not an option against GSC. No. We're everywhere or at once, and it's going to hurt. Okay, cool. Worst matchups. That's a fantastic question. Worst matchups for GSC are going to be things that either we cannot move or things that kill us too damn quickly or terrifyingly both. Things that we cannot move, Dark Angel Terminator spam. A single unit of Dark Angel Terminators in a Dark Angel list, whatever. I can ignore that all day long. I can eventually work my way through that if you make me. 20 Terminators? Ooh, scary. Don't like that at all. Along similar lines, armies that kill us too fast. Orcs. Orcs are a difficult matchup for GSC once the Orc player knows what they're doing. If the Orc player doesn't know what they're doing, I mean, if any player doesn't know what they're doing, it's going to be an easy game for GSC, but that's a problem. CSM Terminators used to be a really big issue. CSM Terminators don't exist anymore, so that's not as big of a concern. Space Wolves I'm playing tomorrow morning. I haven't played that one yet, but we'll see how that goes. Iron Hands is interesting because they're not very mobile, which I can usually take advantage of, but also screw that Volcan. That thing can go right to hell.
Yeah.
That is a unit that I cannot move, and that picks up a squad of anything it wants per turn comfortably.
Yep.
Terrifying. So those guys are all an issue. The right Tau builds can be an issue, especially if they get the right 8 matchups or the right boards / going first / missions. So there's a lot of potential to go wrong, but none of the matchups are god awful. They're all playable. GSC are an army that can deal with, that has the tools to deal with whatever it needs to, and a lot of armies don't have the tools to deal with them. So there's I have forgotten the actual worst matchup, which is neither of those things, which is Guard. Guard, I swear that whoever wrote the Guard Codex has a roommate that plays GSC and hates their guts. personally. That codex is so offensive in what it does to GSC. I have slowly but surely figured out how to play that matchup, and I still hate it. Indirect is terrible. Indirect that ignores both my hit mods and my feel no pains is especially terrible. Army-wide, like some infiltrators, is a thing that you can deal with as a GSC player. Army-wide infiltrators that move infinite inches, and some of them deep strike, is not a thing that you can deal with very easily as a GSC player. Ratlings are awful. The officer of the fleet is rude as hell. No one takes him, but people around me take him because they're scared, and they should be. But it's annoying. That dude, for those of you who don't know, spends 2 CP and says, that unit can't come in from deep strike this turn. Go to hell. That dude sucks. They have all the things. It's very annoying. I've managed to beat guard, and this is where I should mention that I completely missed the part. I haven't talked about taking guard, which is the last thing that I'll talk about before we jump into actually how to beat this army. If you take guard, in my mind, there are 3 options for what I think you should take. You can take, which are 2 options for an Ox support and 1 option for a patrol. Now, let's start with the one that I think is the most fun. You can check this out on the YouTube. We did a bit rep of this, myself versus Lucas, which I don't know if it's called GSC and Guard or Forces of the Hive Mind, but it's that versus Lucas's Chaos Knights, and that is to bring in Death Strike missile launchers, baby. Oh, man, is that a fun unit. Lucas, tell them what a Death Strike does, for those of you who haven't played into them yet.
Well, I mean, firsthand. Just direct your attention to the model. It's a box with a giant F-off missile strapped to it. And it slaps a pie plate down on the table and says, if you're here next turn, I'm going to drop 16 mortals on you. And you're forced to move. And then he will begin the action to move the funny pie plate. And it'll just chase you across the table. Yeah. This particular synergy with GSC here is that if they go first, they can have like 20 bikers lock you in your DZ. And by lock, I don't mean like you can charge and get around them. I mean like you cannot leave. So you will be getting mortals dropped inside your butt next turn, which is why the Death Strike plus bike combo is so terrifying.
Yeah, it's very funny. So you can take one of these in an Ox support, or you can take 2 of these in a patrol. And it's very funny. I don't think it's better than mono to grab these. Maybe the single is, but having played it a bunch, I'm not entirely convinced. What's cool is that it's a combination of things, right? Maybe it's I lock you in and I drop a God Spear on you and you take infinite mortal wounds. Or maybe it's you have a bunch of small units of dudes that I would love to just weaken, and we're just going to put a plasma warhead there and say no one's on that objective anymore. You get to pick the warhead after you see what your opponent's list is, which is very silly. I don't know why that's the only thing in the game that does that, but it is. So those are both fun, and just manipulating where your opponent can and cannot stand, and then hitting them with actual mortals if they ever try to call your bluff on it. Really interesting gameplay, a lot of fun. If I had infinite time, I would play that list until I got perfect at it, and it would be terrifying. But it's going to be a really steep learning curve to act, or a very S-shaped learning curve. It's very easy to figure it out, and then once you figure out the basics, the next rest of it is going to be really hard, but it's going to get really good. Once you get really good at the positioning, it is what it is. That's really cool. The other option, which I take in the patrol version or in what I think is probably my best version of GSC for singles, is to take an auxiliary support or in a slot in the patrol of a singular scout sentinel. And this singular scout sentinel is to solve the infiltrator war once and for all. He is a 40-point unit. That's all he costs. No CP, because its Ox supports are free now. Welcome to Omens. And he's a 40-point dude on an 80-millimeter base who sits out in no man's land and says, you don't get to put any infiltrators within 9 of me. So what that basically means is it's a 40-millimeter base plus a 9-inch channel backwards to your DZ, plus a 9-inch channel forwards to your opponent's DZ. And of course, your opponent also can't be within 9 of your DZ. So like it's a channel all the way from DZ to DZ at the end of the day. And that right there is a bike path, because the bike's pregame move has to stay outside of 9, which means that if your opponent has 2 squads of infiltrators or 10 ratlings or a couple of scout sentinels of their own or whatnot, you're going to get stuck. I call my scout sentinel Moses because he parts the Red Sea and the bikes go right on through and they hit whatever they need to turn 1. So stuff is getting tagged, stuff is getting wrapped, stuff is getting demolition charged, stuff is getting Adelan incinerated. It's awesome. And it's the only way that I figured out to have a real game into guard if the guard player knows what they're doing, because even a double wrap into 2 scout sentinels is a solvable problem for a guard player. This pisses me off so much. They do need 3 CP.
Combat with them, huh?
Yeah. So one of them desperate breakouts and leaves, and the other one, the first Dorn, targets the unit that's in combat with them with the stratagem, and only one unit can use the stratagem, so only one unit can shoot at them. But the guard player isn't actually trying to kill the bikes; they're trying to kill their own sentinel, because on hit rolls of 1, the attacks hit the sentinel, and a Dorn kills a sentinel real well. So suddenly, neither of them are in combat because one desperate broke out, one's dead, assuming they have 3 CP. If you do the math and your opponent cannot put together 3 command points on turn 1 to make this combo happen, double wrap sentinels all day long. That's awesome. Or if you can triple wrap sentinels, that would also work. But that's asking a lot. So Moses actually solves this problem. He actually lets you get to your opponent turn 1, and there's no way around that. And the only place where he couldn't do that would be on Abandoned Sanctuaries, which he already can't do because your opponent couldn't do it either. So you're rocking and rolling. Therefore, your the Came From Below squad is gone. Okay. So those are your guard options. That's where I've settled. I like my boy Moses. Playing mono is obviously the only option in teams formats, so I'm very comfortable with that as well. And if you're going to an RTT and want to mess with some people, definitely take the double Death Strike version. It's awesome. Single Death Strike, also very cool if you're willing to just sort of forfeit the guard matchup, which I kind of understand at this point. It's really, really hard, even with the Sentinel. And the Death Strike does apply a lot of flexibility. How you fit in that 50 or 160 points is up to you. I think for me personally, I ended up cutting the Flamers for 15, the third demo charge for 5, and Excavate for 20. Something like that. But you can mess with the points however you want. It's totally up to you. But my recommendation is the Scout Sentinel. You heard it here first on BIFPOD, the Next Generation. Okay, cool. Let's talk a bit about how to play against this nonsense. Because as you've heard for the last 100 minutes, there is a lot of nonsense going on. Which one of y'all wants to start? Talk a little bit about what your big picture. Okay, Lucas, you can start. What's your big picture strategy for dealing with GSC? Sort of army agnostic, and then you can get into whatever specifics you want to, obviously.
Sure. So my approach to tackling any particular army is think about what they're weak at, and then try to target that the entire game. Right? So with some armies, like, world leaders have come out recently, they only do melee. So try to take advantage of that as much as possible. For GSC, their weakness is we shoot a whole lot. But what's the longest range gun in your army, Tyler?
Seismic cannon is 24-inch range.
Everything else is like 12. Grenade launchers are 24. Kellamorph is 18. Shotguns are 12. Everything is super short range. So if you can use terrain and like models being placed out as bait to kind of like lure the GSC player forward and get them to commit a bunch of units, you can get their models positioned in places where you can actually pounce on them and kill them. This is very easy for armies like Orcs that have a big burst of speed. So I'm a little bit, biased isn't the right word, but like, my decision is, or my way to play around GSC is a little bit informed by the army that I play, obviously. But in general, force them to commit units very far forward so that you don't have to go way out of your way to go deal with them. The range of their army is a big limiting factor, and you need to exploit that as much as possible. That's the first way to play around them. The second way to play around them is understand the way they want to pull models to leave coherency and to get out of combat. This is less of a deal with the Jackals because they can fall back, shoot, and charge. But especially with the Neophytes, do everything in your power to keep squads of Neophytes engaged because they have no way to fall back and shoot. Tyler was talking about some of the tricks that he is available to leave combat, but the grenade trick in combat, for example, costs a CP, A, so that's a resource, and B, is not guaranteed. So if you can inflict 0 casualties on a squad of Neophytes, actually, let me talk about that first. The inflicting 0 casualties part is very important because when you start doing damage to a squad, the GSC player will see, oh, he's probably lining up a tag here. I'm just voluntarily going to break coherency so that there's no way for you to keep the squad engaged in the next turn. If you cause 0 casualties to an enemy unit, he has to use the grenade stratagem to try to get out of combat. So that is a great way to keep GSC units engaged, is to just cause 0 casualties to them, and then there's very low chance that that unit will be shooting you next turn. And then after that point, just line up tags because they have nowhere to fall back and shoot. So just very simple, bump into them. You don't need to be worried about casualties. It's just guardsmen swinging you back on 4s. It's no big deal. The other thing to keep in mind with reference to model pulling and coherency is making sure their units go away in their entirety, because the resurrections are such a big part of the army, and you can get really punished by, you know, a squad of dudes or a squad of bikers resurrecting a bunch of models and then zipping over, stealing your objective, blowing you up. Make sure that when you line up to attack a unit, you have enough attacks or shots or swings in combat, whatever it is, to wipe that unit out, and you have a backup plan in case your first swing fails. So let me give an example. For orcs, we have units that are very good at punching neophytes, and we have units that are very good at punching bikers. Any of the 2 or 3 damage stuff is amazing at punching bikers, but none of it kills a squad of bikers in one go. So I have to be very careful playing against GSC to line up multiple units charging one squad of bikers, so that I'm not super scared of his interrupt. If he wants to interrupt and throw a demo charge, that's 3 CP, whatever. So I charge a bunch of units in. One charges the middle of his formation, and the other one charges the outside. I'll fight with the unit on the outside first. He'll kill like 5 or 6 bikers. And then the unit in the middle formation still gets to pile in 3, keep the unit engaged, and make their swings to finish off the unit of bikers. Don't assume that one combat unit is going to kill those bikers, because they're -1 to hit, baby transhuman, and 6 to feel in the pain. So against a lot of really tough melee units like Sanguinary Guard, that's like -1 to hit, -1 to wound, and chances to interrupt your 2 damage swings. You might not actually kill that unit, even though you anticipate to. So just be very cognizant of their unit surviving, because especially the bikers will fall back and cause problems for you next turn. So those are like the 3 big things that I keep in mind. Try to exploit their range. Tag units, don't cause unnecessary casualties if you don't need to and you're going for a tag. And then make sure their units, especially the bikers, go away by thinking about your fight phase in your movement phase and making sure you have multiple units lined up to wipe out a biker unit. Yeah, those are my big 3. I know you've played against GSC a little less than me, Nick, but do you have anything to add? Any thoughts?
For like GSC in general? Yeah. I mean, like you're much more experienced in the matchup than I am. I've only played it a few times. I think the biggest thing for me is GSC seems like this very daunting army. I feel like the biggest thing I hear on the internet a lot is people are like, oh, I have no idea what GSC do, which makes sense. They're an army that came out a year ago and haven't really seen much play and are now all of a sudden like seeing a huge resurgence. And they're a fairly confusing army. Like you show up to the table and your opponent throws down 12 cardboard tokens and goes, okay, that's my army. If you have no idea what's going on, you're about to lose. Like, so I think the biggest thing for GSC, like at least if you have literally never played against them, don't panic, boot up Wahapedia, go read what they do, or rewatch this episode, or hit up Tyler. He'll talk to you for, an hour and 48 minutes. So yeah, that's the biggest thing for me is understanding what they do. Which I mean, like, is pretty generic advice, but like more so than many other armies. Like they don't most Marine armies play somewhat similarly, right? Like Custodes, okay, they're just Marines with like an invul, like in a few other wacky things, but like not that much. GSC are insanely wacky. Biggest thing for me that I look for when playing, I mean, so I've really only played against them with like Votan, which are a relatively low footprint elite army, which kind of means you have to accept certain trades. You're not going to be able to screen everything out just because of the fact that they can appear within 6. They have a squad that can appear within 3. It's very hard to screen anything out. So what you really want to do is kind of identify, like, if you have a really important squad that's great at counterpunching them, try to protect that squad at all costs. Like, you can hide it in a building for their drop turn. And, like, you could screen out behind that and be like, okay, this counterpunch unit or counter shoot unit that can wipe out, like, a whole squad of acolytes in one, like, activation, keep that protected. You can also, like, if you are playing a less elite army, you can push them out. Like what Tyler's saying, like their ranges are 24. You can throw stuff forward on their drop turn and they have to still appear within 6 of those units. But like you can kind of create like this bubble where they can appear and shoot your screens and murder your screens. But your nice important units that are like just outside of reach aren't going to get hit. That's the biggest thing for me. And then also what you're saying, like the bikes are extremely tanky. Be prepared to commit multiple units to killing those bikes. Yeah, and then last but not least, tagging the neophytes is insanely effective. As far as I know, you don't have a fallback and shoot, right?
Yeah, the only two ways that you could get fallback and shoot on the neophytes would be to either sacrifice 3/4 of your cult trait to grab it at -1, or you could take a Magus, which is a 7th character that I don't super value for Psychic Stimulus. But if you're taking a wizard, she's the one to take.
So, like, look at where their models are. If you can get a charge off where you can both kill the bikes and then touch the like acolytes, that's pretty great. It's all about minimizing the damage because the way you play against GSC is the game happens on turn 2 and 3. You need to be prepared to, like what Lucas is saying earlier in our episode, you need to be prepared to clap back turn 2 or else like the game's over if you don't remove enough of their assets. But like, you don't just have to kill them. You can sacrifice assets to slow down their shooting. So like, that's what they're looking to do to you. Like what Tyler was saying is he's looking to have a whole squad just try to charge and tag stuff so that when he drops down, he can kill. And then half of your army that he didn't kill is like stuck in combat with him. So
also be prepared for turn 2 to be painful. Even if your army isn't elite, you're going to lose a lot of stuff on the drop turn. And it's just a matter of how you prepare for it rather than, I mean, like physically in terms of where your models are and also mentally, like they're going to come in and kill. They're going to be completely unchargeable, uninteractable, and then they're going to come in and kill like 600 to 700 points in your army, and you're going to feel terrible. But just soldier on. You can do it as long as you've set yourself up correctly, and don't give up. Because it can definitely feel brutal on that go turn of like they come in and obliterate you and move block you in 3 places, and you're like, what can I do? But if you set yourself up correctly, you can still win that game for sure.
Yeah. And the biggest thing I think is you need to hit back with your whole army. If you're like, oh, I'll hit back with 800 of my 1,300 remaining points and I'll save 500, you're going to lose the DPS race. Like, they just committed their whole army at you. Be prepared to do the same.
Yep.
Definitely.
So, yeah.
I've seen a lot of people lose in the real morale phase, like not the in-game one, but like as a player, they're like, oh man, this is awful. There's nothing to be done here. And just stop playing seriously. But you'll also then see players do that and say, all right, well, let's do what we can. And then suddenly they kill 1,400 points back because my stuff is at the end of the day vaguely made of paper. And if you can get the right units to connect in the right places, it's terrifying. That's when Ninja brings up a good point here. Do not fully castle backwards and expect them to fully drop turn 2. Because there's definitely no need to do that. And I've had this happen where someone will be like, all right, cool, that's fine. I'm going to go live in my corner. I'm going to put 10 infiltrators way out in front of me. What are you going to do about it? And I'll say, yeah, that's fine. Cool. I'll drop in with a unit, maybe 2 units, and the bikes will take care of your infiltrators and say, now what are you going to do about it while you're sitting in your back corner of your DZ? And suddenly you have to come out and you've lost your best screening elements in the process and you've lost a lot of points. Because that's what's scary is that GSC can just win the race to 100 if you let them. If you let me score a 12 turn 2 and turn 3, the game is over. I've already won. Tabling me won't be sufficient. So you can't try to sit back and hope that you can recover later on the points race. Well, you have to with the damage race.
Another thing in terms of scoring, winning the points game, secondaries to take against GSC. They give up 100 million no prisoners points and 100 million assassinate points. Take no prisoners. I don't care that you have inflexible command. I don't care that you have blood gods due. Doesn't matter. Take no prisoners. You will not regret it. Avoid taking assassinate unless you have no other option. Or you have very good tools to go hunt down their characters. Because if you take assassinate, the GSC player can and will not play without their characters, but keep them in the back such that it's very difficult for you to get to them. So assassinate is definitely sus, but if you don't take no prisoners, especially into the 80 neophytes build, I'm sorry, you're trolling.
My list does start with, I believe it's 172 wounds, and then I start getting guys back after that. And I am often trading 20 wounds for a couple points. You will score no prisoners. Please take it. Something else to talk about is just how valuable. Lucas was making this point earlier, but I want to hammer it home. It is surprisingly easy to keep a unit safe from GSC. If you have an L and you cram a unit all the way into the L and you put something else in front of them, getting exposure on that unit requires using the perfect ambush squad. And now, you necessarily have to be concerned about I have to drop outside of 6 and within 12 of them to even get a token on them. Now, mind you, that 12 doesn't have to have line of sight. I can do a big horseshoe kind of thing, but it's very preventable to not let me get line of sight within 18 of that one unit while dropping outside of 6. It is very easy on that topic of screening to throw up your hands and say, you come in at 3 inches. What's the point? One unit comes in at 3 inches. One unit comes in at 9 inches. One unit comes in at 6 inches. One unit comes in at 8 inches or maybe 6 inches, right? It is shockingly easy to mess up a lot of the 6-inch stuff and make my life way harder if you think about it. If you choose not to think about it, because as you throw your hands in the air and say there's a 3-inch squad, I will take that, but you will regret it. I'll talk about the Biophagus in a second. What are y'all's thoughts on counter deep striking against GSC? If I don't put my stuff on the table, you can't shoot it when your stuff shows up. What do you think about that as an idea?
I mean, maybe if you really need to protect a particular piece, I would definitely recommend Strat Reserve instead of Deep Strike, because the GSC will carpet the table if they go first, and you will not be able to bring your unit in when you want to. So definitely do Strat Reserve rather than Deep Strike. But yeah, it can be an all right tool if you really need to protect one thing in particular.
Yeah. If you have a good shooting unit with a big footprint, Strat Reserving it's pretty strong. It's I haven't tried that myself though, so
yeah, I generally find it goes really poorly because it means I get to pick where your stuff shows up, and that's not what you want happening. Because Strat Reserves is really easy to control. You're coming in on your table edge, and that's it. And also, if it's a shooting unit, I can also set myself up in such a way that if they walk on, they can walk on within engagement range. But if the only option is walking on within engagement range, they're not shooting me, and also nothing else is shooting that unit of mine. And also, they have to punch me. That's a worst case scenario for a brick of AdMech Rangers or something like that, where you really want that. So it can be something to take advantage of, but I would certainly not be going for deep strikes proper, because I will comfortably zone the table. A squad, I can drop 5 acolytes, and that covers my entire backfield on Hammer and Anvil, basically, at 9s. It's a sketchy proposition. Sarepta asks why I don't like the Biophagus. Like Lucas said, I already have 6 characters, so I give up 19 points on no prisoners. The difference between 19 and 22 doesn't sound like a big deal, but it is. I also think you have to take his proficient planning to make him viable, which I think he's 40 points base, and then the plan is another 15, so he goes up to 55. I don't have a really good place for those points. And other than that first thing, you're paying 55 points to give a unit feel no pain, basically. I'd give it to a unit of bikes who already have a 6-up feel no pain, and then I'd be just rolling D3s hoping for good stuff, which is showing up on later turns, or I'm deep striking him in, and then I'm only giving things out basically turn 2 and turn 3. I don't think that he gets enough value for the points and the risk to no prisoners. And I have enough characters around as is. Or sorry, assassinate. Yeah, my no prisoners. No prisoners in the rearview mirror.
If he gave a buff, if he gave above.
I know you've been talking a lot this episode, so I'll give you a second to recuperate, Lucas.
If he gave up a buff, so the one buff he gives, the feel no pain, is obviously super important. The other 2 are melee only, if I recall correctly.
+1 AP in melee.
That's
and
what
6
feels bad, because if you're just
12.
rolling a D3 hoping for the good one, and the other 2 are useless considering you're doing shooting only. If those 2 were maybe reroll once to hit or +1 AP on ranged attacks or anything other than useless, I would definitely think that guy deserves more credit. But if you're already forking over the quarter of your trait for War Convoy,
Yeah. A unit of Neos with a 5-up feel no pain sounds really good in theory, but in practice, I don't see it being worthwhile because your opponent either says, cool, so that's the one that I'm not shooting, or cool, that's the one I'm ludicrously overkilling. And neither of those situations work out particularly well for you.
Yep.
Yeah, so that's a big thing. Can you talk a little bit, Lucas, about how to win against GSC by applying pressure? Because we've talked a lot about how to win by taking a punch. You've managed to win this game by punching first in a number of our practice reps. What have you been? What happens there that works out so well for you?
Part of it can be when you go first, even if you're not going to charge them, incentivize them to come interact with you on turn 1, because then you get to piecemeal the army, and fighting piecemeal against GSC, it's so much better than dealing with them all at once. So like the tempo goes, Orc, let's just say it's Orcs versus GSC. Orc player goes first, runs forward, threatens all the objectives, but stays outside of like crazy demo charge range, because the GFC's player doesn't want to get charged. I disconnected. Can you hear me now? Yes. The GC player now has a decision. It is, do I want to come forward and interact with the Orc player so that they don't get a 12 and a whole bunch of points for free? Or do I wait for my drop turn so that when I come and get him, it hurts even more? That question can be a difficult one to answer. And I honestly don't know which one is better. I think the forcing them to come out and fight you early is a net positive for the GSC's opponent, because they get to piecemeal the opponent's army. Instead of having to find a solution for 60 neophytes and 20 bikers, you just have to find a solution for 20 bikers, and accept that the neophytes are going to come down.
I love that Lucas has made the list substantially less models because it makes him feel better about it. It's 90 neophytes and 30 bikers, not 60 and 20.
Yeah, but I assume you're not going to use all of them and put them all in my face in one turn unless you want to turbo lose.
Fair enough.
Yeah. So that can be how to use aggression to help against GSC. Also, depending on which mission you're playing, trying to remember which missions I've played against GSC on. It can be difficult to deny their primary with the reviving shenanigans and all the OPSEC, but it's still doable, especially if you focus on the neophyte bricks, because their secondaries are amazing. So you have to hit their points somewhere, and if you can put them on a couple 4s, a couple 8s instead of 12s, then it's not an easy game after that, but like it makes it a lot easier. So put yourself in range to charge the objectives, such that if they want to get points, you can charge them or shoot them.
Definitely. We got a question in the chat here. What are the really good profiles to be putting into bikes? What should you be looking through your codex for, or your list rather, if you want to kill a unit of bikes?
Well, the great news is that the strength doesn't matter at all. Everything in every army will moon GSC on 3s. So all you really need is AP 2 to 3 and... Oh, sorry. This model's kind of screwed up. AP 2 to 3 and multi-damage. Preferably damage 2 and 3 with a lot of attacks, which obviously Orcs have an absolute abundance of, but other armies have a lot of that as well. Units like Thunderhammers are very good to put into the bikers because they just basically flatline a biker every time. Possessed are very good into bikers. Votan
the Thunderhammers are also especially good because anything that is already -1 to hit, that you're already factoring that into your math, helps out a lot here that you don't care about my -1 on top of that.
Anything with Chapter Master to get around the -1 to hit and just stack up a lot of hits is very powerful. Trying to think about other things. I don't actually find that like 1 damage weapons en masse are very impactful. Especially because those units should be dedicated neophyte hunters. They should either be hitting the neophytes or hiding from them so that they can get them on a future turn. Trying to think. Anything I missed, Tyler?
No, I think that's most of it. But yeah, just make sure that if you're trying to hit them in multiple activations, you're very fast, or if you're trying to hit them in 1 activation, you're hitting them very, very hard. It's the failure to do either of those that gets people in trouble. Mm-hmm. Cool. All right. So there's sort of your basic game plan. You're going to try at a high Hey, your important stuff, maybe you strat reserve it, maybe you tuck it into L's. You're going to prevent the 6-inchers from getting you absolutely everywhere. You're going to accept some damage from the 3-inchers. You're going to cover your 40 mil chips with dudes. I realize I didn't explain that in full. Lucas, can you explain what I'm saying when I do that? Because I know you've learned this lesson.
Yeah, so because an objective chip is 40 millimeters, and the controlling range for an objective is 3 inches, if you are entirely taking up the 40 millimeter chip in the middle of the table, or in the middle of the objective, they cannot, the GSC cannot land on that objective outside of 3. This is another great way to also like threaten heroic interventions onto such objectives. By putting a character on at least a 40 millimeter base in the middle, you ensure that you can heroic onto any part of the objective. So that's a great way to ensure that your objectives stay safe.
Definitely. Quick note for anyone looking to be using heroics against GSC, we do have a 1 CP that unit can't heroically intervene stratagem, so watch out for that. But again, it's a resource and it can only be used in one place at a time, and it requires a token to make happen later. So it's going to work. But yeah, so there's your defense plan. Cram important units into L's or keep them off the table. Pressure the primary, put them in multiple places at once. Charge and obliterate bike units, console and tag into neophyte units. As many neophytes as you can without doing any damage if possible. Threaten objectives, stand on objectives. And above all, it's going to hurt, but you're going to get through this. So keep a smile on your face and make it happen.
Sounds about right. Cool.
Well, thank you all so much for joining us for this definitely short GSC episode, like I promised Nick. We appreciate you sitting through this. Hopefully you've got some better idea of what GSC is, how they work, and what to do about them. Next week, we're going to be back to do the same thing with orcs. So we're all going to be wearing green face paint and shoulder and football gear or whatever. It's going to be a lot of fun. If you've got questions in advance that you want to throw at Lucas about orcs, make sure to drop those in the Patreon Discord or hit him up on whatever social media you can find him at. But yeah, it's going to be a real good time. Again, you can check us out on Patreon. You can become a member on the YouTube here. Check out the bit reps. The best thing you can do personally, in my mind, is subscribe to the YouTube channel. Even if you don't watch us on YouTube, that's the best way to show that GW that you care about the stuff that we're doing. And that's how we end up getting pre-order stuff and whatnot, which would be really cool. We'd love to have more content in that realm in the future someday. But with that all being said and done, thank you so much for joining us. I've been Tyler.
I've been Nick.
I remain Lucas Troller, Destroyer of Bugs.
And we'll see you next time to Call the Wall. Thanks for joining us, everyone.
Have a good one.